Yeah, I mean, the two people I was referencing that I need for both the first two items are, I could do it on my own, but I'd like to have is the Chancellor and Jackie, and both of them I understand are like 5 minutes running, like 5 minutes behind. So by the time we get there, I could do some intro, and maybe one of them would show up by then.
Okay.
All right. Well, why don't we wait 2 minutes and we'll begin, and we'll hopefully they'll be right along.
Roger, that deck of slides that we received for all the topics we're going to talk about in the general session, that was really impressive. I mean, it's very clear. I mean, well done. Really interesting topics. I just thought that all those slides were great.
Yep. You talking specifically about the Gordian stuff, Pat, or
that and then the foundation stuff.
Yes.
And it was just well done. So it was interesting to look through.
Yep. You're right. So, Ellen, are you making it to, I can't remember, are you making it to spring training this year or not? You are. Good.
Yep. We've got 3 games booked.
Excellent.
Barbara, are you going?
No, I am headed to Palm Springs, California this weekend. One of my bucket lists was to go to the Indian Wells tennis tournament. So that's what I'm doing next week.
Nice.
Is that one of the big tournaments? I'm not.
Yeah, it's men and women, and it's the equivalent of the next step after the 4 opens that are
Great.
held around the world.
Nice.
Ta-da! Jackie made it.
Oh, Jackie's here. Okay. Well, why don't we begin then? I would like to welcome everyone to the meeting of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee. Before we go into the executive session, I just wanted to say that this agenda is obviously full of very important issues for our consideration and vote. Just wanted to remind everybody about the obvious, that the fiscal 24 budget looms large on our minds. And I was recently honored to participate along with Chair Riley in senior administration in 2 days of the annual budget hearings with the presidents and financial officers from each of the campuses and the law school. They're all facing significant challenges to one extent or another in getting to a balanced budget without any reliance on system reserves. But I've been really impressed by each of our presidents and their willingness to think outside the box about how to get there on critical issues like enrollment and retention and cooperation within the framework of unified accreditation, and looking for expense reductions that will have the least possible impact on our students. So these individual university budgets still remain a work in progress. And as you know, our committee as a whole will begin to focus on those budgets very soon. So just wanted to let committee members know, as we receive more final proposed campus budgets shortly, we'll be getting them out to everybody on the committee as quickly as possible, so that we can have our work informed that we will be beginning in earnest later this month. So that's where we are, but we've got some difficult challenges ahead, but I'm sure we will get there, and everybody's on the campus level and on the system level working hard to get there. So,
Trustee Cates,
yes.
we'll have to do roll call.
Yeah, so I was about to suggest that the first thing we need to do is to call the roll. Ellen, could you call the roll?
Certainly. Trustee Cates,
Here.
Trustee Kane,
Here.
Trustee Flood,
Here.
Trustee McMahon,
Here.
Trustee Riley,
Here.
and Trustee Misha will be joining us late. So we're all set. And I know the Chancellor has just arrived.
Welcome, Chancellor. Thanks. So could I have a motion for the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee of the Board of Trustees to go into executive session under the provisions of 1 MRSA Section 405-6C to discuss the condition, acquisition, or disposition of real property or economic development if premature disclosure of the information would prejudice the competitive or bargaining position of the system. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved.
Moved
Second.
by trustee Kane and seconded by trustee Flood. Ellen, could you call the roll?
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
trustee Kane,
Yes.
trustee Flood,
Yes,
trustee McMahon,
Yes.
trustee Riley.
Yes,
The motion is carried.
Thank you. And I, just for planning purposes of others, we're scheduled to be in this executive session until approximately 8:20. Thanks. Hey, we are back. And apologies, well, get everybody now. Apologies to everybody for being a little late in executive session. And now we'll get to our regular agenda. I also wanted to welcome, in addition to all the system staff and our presidents, our faculty representatives, and I'm not sure they're all here. Michael Scott, you with us?
Yes, I am.
And Clyde Mitchell?
Yes, good morning.
Thank you, Clyde, and William Otto. Maybe he'll be joining us in a while. Okay, well, thank you very much. So our first public agenda is discussion of the University of Maine Mahaney Dome replacement, which I think all of us can understand a little more after the last couple of days. President Farini Monday.
Thank you, Trustee Cates. Good morning, everybody. We will be talking with you about getting the Mahaney Dome replaced, and I will turn this over to our new Director of Athletics, whom I'm not sure that you have met. Jude Killey is with us this morning, and Ryan Ward, who is the University of Maine's Director of Space and Capital Management Services. But as you all know, the dome did collapse, and at this point now, it can't be repaired. This is one of many collapses, but the last one for this particular dome. So I'll turn it to Jude and Ryan.
Good morning, everyone.
Jude, and welcome. I guess you're going to go first, Ryan?
I'll let you, okay, yes, thank you. So this agenda item is requesting us to spend up to $3 million on the replacement of the Mahaney Dome that, as the president had mentioned, it collapsed at the end of January. There was a tear that was non-repairable, which our fourth collapse in the 18 years of the history of the dome. We are asking to replace this dome now because our goal is to have a replacement in place by snowflies of the end of this year. So that way our D1 athletic programs are able to practice in it this time next year. We are looking at two options. We are primarily looking at either a steel structure, as we mentioned, and a new dome, which they refer to as an air structure, which is a much more modern and resilient type of dome. So we did list several attributes that we are looking towards to making sure that in our decision that we answer those and address that as we move forward.
And Ryan, we should add the source of funds for this.
Yes, absolutely. So the funding sources, we have two funding sources. The first one would be the insurance claim on the original dome. We are working with Gretchen on that funding source, and then the remaining funding would be from the Harold Alfond Athletic Master Plan. That was part of the replacement of the dome is part of the athletic master plan. We're hoping to do it in a few years, not this year, but as the case happens, we have to do it now. So it is part of our 5-year plan. Unfortunately, we're moving it up a little bit.
Ryan, I think there were some numbers in the materials. How much are we expecting to get from the insurance claim at this point?
Right now, I'll say it's a guesstimate, but it's somewhere between $1.5 to $1.7 million. There is a pretty hefty deductible on the dome, which will take away from that a little bit, but it could be maybe as high as $2 million once you take into consideration all the lost income. The dome is used quite a bit, not just by our students, by the community as well. Unfortunately, several of our local community programs and camps that were getting ready to kick off this spring for spring athletics had to be canceled that we're planning on using that facility.
Other questions? I'm seeing none. And Jude, welcome to the University of Maine system. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
So if there are no further questions, let me read the text of a proposed resolution that the Finance, Facilities and Technology Committee approves the following resolution to be forwarded to the Board of Trustees approval at the March 26, 27-23 board meeting. That the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities and Technology Committee, authorizes the University of Maine system acting through the University of Maine to expend up to $3 million to replace the Mahaney Dome with a same size structure, new turf within the facility, and to construct a connector from a new structure to the Memorial Gym. Is there such a motion?
Moved.
Moved by trustee Flood and seconded by
Second.
trustee Kane. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
trustee Kane,
Yes.
trustee Flood,
yes,
trustee McMahon,
Yes.
trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you very much and good luck, particularly with the insurance claim.
Thank you.
The next agenda item is tab 2 of our materials, the Boudreaux Hall renovations at the University of Maine. And again, President Farini Mundy will start us off.
Thank you very much. And this is another step toward continuing to improve our facilities, made possible by the generous donation of Karen Boudreaux and Tom Jensen, the $1 million donation to help us renovate South Stevens Hall. And Ryan will tell you more about what we would request to do here.
Yes, we are requesting authorization to spend up to $700,000 on renovations to what was formerly known as North Stevens Hall, renamed to Boudreaux Hall as the naming rights.
Sorry, it's wrong in the A sheet, folks. It's north.
So Boudreaux Hall donation that was approved it's about 2 years ago now, had some funding that came through it that we're going to utilize to address some severe deferred maintenance within the building. This is the first step of spending up to $1 million, but those other projects will be smaller and will not need authorization. What we'll be doing here is adding 2 gender-neutral single-use bathrooms on the first floor, as well as addressing the SPIA space, providing them an actual office on the first floor, and then some additional work in the Cohen Center up on the second floor. This will go quite a ways within the building. It will really brighten up the building itself, present a much more welcoming atmosphere for our students, as well as our faculty and staff that works within this building. Just for an example, currently Boudreaux Hall only has 1 single-use bathroom on the first floor and then has some basement bathrooms that are not all that well appealing. So these additional attributes will certainly help the building bring it along. The funding sources, as the president had mentioned, is primarily from the Boudreaux Hall donation, but also Dean Haddad has additional donations that she's applying towards this project and hopefully future projects as well as we move towards this building. Boudreaux Hall has a net asset value of 1. So this is a good step to put towards this building as well.
Thank you, Ryan. Questions about this project? I'm seeing none. Let me then read the text of the proposed resolution that the Board of Trustees, acting through the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee, authorizes the University of Maine, acting through the University of Maine system, to expend up to $700,000 in gift money for renovations to Boudreaux Hall. Is there a motion?
so moved.
Moved by trustee Flood and seconded by trustee Kane. Any discussion? Seeing none, Ellen, could you call the roll, please?
Certainly. And this action item is within the purview of the Finance Facilities Technology Committee, so it will not be forwarded to the board.
Thank you.
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
trustee Kane,
Yes.
trustee Flood,
Yes,
trustee McMahon,
Yes.
trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Thank you. We'll then move on to tab 3. A discussion of the Center for Teaching Innovation Renovation Project budget increase at the University of Southern Maine. President Edmondson.
I apologize. I had a little difficulty unmuting there. I believe that Buster Neal was going to join us for this portion of the conversation and talk a little bit about this project, but the basic line on this is that the construction and labor costs increased, and so the price of the project increased as a result.
Okay, so again, we're talking about an additional $225,000. So the original cost was $700,000, it sounds like?
That is correct.
Okay. And you're saying this is all due to just construction inflation?
That is correct.
Project isn't changing in any way?
No, the project is not changing. It's just the increased costs.
Thank you. Questions for President Edmondson about this project? Seeing none, let me read the text of a proposed resolution. And again, this is another one of those which we have jurisdiction to act on without full board approval. That the Board of Trustees, acting through the Finance, Facilities and Technology Committee, authorizes the University of Southern Maine, acting through the University of Maine system, to expend an additional $225,000, bringing the total project expenditure up to $925,000 to renovate 3,240 square feet of space for the Center for Teaching Innovation located on the third floor of Bailey Hall on the Gorham campus. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Flood and seconded by
Second.
Trustee Kane. Discussion regarding the motion? Seeing none, Ellen, could you call the roll?
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
trustee Kane,
Yes.
trustee Flood,
Yes.
trustee McMahon,
Yes.
trustee Riley.
Yes.
Motion is carried.
Thank you. Amazingly, we're now ahead of time on our agenda. We made up all the lost time and gained some. So thanks to everybody for their succinct presentations. Now we'll move on to tab 4, an authorization for the USM Center for the Arts, a subject we have discussed before, and this will be led by President Edmondson. Good morning again.
Yes, good morning again. Thank you, Trustee Cates. And Ellen, will somebody be putting up the slides for me? Or am I expected to put up my own slides?
We weren't expecting to, no.
Okay, I will, if I can share the screen, I get those up.
And we have those who have them on their screen at home. It's tab 4.
And I'm not able to access the slides from to share the slides. I'm not sure why.
Here we go.
Ah, wonderful. Great.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you so much. My apologies. I'm not sure what was going on with my Zoom. Okay. Go. All right, so thank you again for your time this morning. So we're here to discuss the Center for the Arts, its associated costs, and also making this long-held dream a reality. Specifically, we're asking for your recommendation to the full board that we move forward with construction on the Center for the Arts. I have a few slides I would like to talk through to lay out how the project has unfolded and where we are now, hopefully address questions you may have, and ask for your support in the next decision in front of us. I believe we all feel strongly about the University of Southern Maine putting our students at the center of arts and culture in Portland, and that this goal is a big part of our university's future. The question is how we secure this position for them and for the university, and I hope the Center for the Arts is part of that picture. So we can move on to slide 2. To be honest, this project was underway, as you know, when I arrived as president. I was really excited and also a little concerned when I heard about it. I know the value of music and the arts. It got me admitted to Penn State. I had practice rooms dedicated to piano performance, and I had modern spaces for recitals and performances. These spaces were less so when my youngest son went to Penn State as a bass performer major over 20 years later. But I've seen projects like this go sideways, and they go sideways for one of 2 reasons. One, they are either built entirely on hopes and dreams without the programs or students to back them up, or secondly, the long-term vision isn't there. That's not the case with the University of Southern Maine, and this is also why I'm grateful we're having this conversation today. We've established programs with an excellent reputation, and we have a long-term vision to provide arts and music programs that will serve the region and beyond. Our Osher School of Music both trains exceptional musicians. As you know, they're Grammy and Tony Award winning. We have singers who perform at the Met, the Royal Opera House, and venues around the world. Our Osher School of Music also educates exceptional music teachers who teach students across the state. In fact, the last 5 years of Maine's outstanding new music educators of the year were USM alumni. Our students and faculty already are critical to the Southern Maine's art community, but they have done so in non-purpose-built buildings, and it can be a long drive from Gorham to Maine's urban center. It's time for our strength in the arts to come out of hiding and to truly shine. This will benefit the University of Southern Maine. It is how the University of Southern Maine will differentiate itself as a center for excellence that is responsive to the community, but it is also good for the system and the state. So we're here today because we know how important it is to do our due diligence and to get on top of the costs. Every dollar we spend will go toward an investment in the program, an investment in the University of Southern Maine. And in 10 years, I believe we all hope this will be an investment we will be proud of, much like people who bought property on the East End 10 years ago feel now, even more so when we see the impact on our students in the community. So we can go on to slide 3. In early 2022, this is what we agreed on. It was a scaled down version of what the 2020 schematic design phase.
Yeah,
We shrunk the project as much as
I'm so
possible.
sorry.
Excuse me, hold on,
Buster, can you mute?
Buster, you're on, can you mute yourself? Good.
There we go.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
So again, we shrunk the project as much as we could then. We decreased the concert hall from 500 to 200, and we focused this building primarily for teaching and learning. And then in early 2022, these are the numbers we thought we were working with. But from the fall of 2021, when the CFA was last estimated, construction costs, like all other sectors, continued to rise nationally. And what happened in Portland mirrored this national trend. Construction inflation increased by approximately 14% nationwide. The CFA saw approximately a 17% increase in price during this period. The slightly higher inflation amount can be attributed to the specialty nature of the building and the generally higher wage rates found in the Northeast. And also through our due diligence, as the committee had asked, we ensured that this project will meet the needs of the future. And in that process, we found we were meeting almost all the needs. We found 2 major issues we were able to resolve relatively cheaply without making major changes to the design. But as you can see at the bottom of the slide, there is an increased cost, and I'll go into the reasons for the design change and the increased cost in a minute. So we can go on to slide 4, please. So one of the things we learned in the audit is that we had an assumption that music and visual arts could share a space. Normally, while it would have been true, it turns out that our visual arts program uses a special type of press that is a hand-operated floor model etching press. I didn't know what that was, but apparently it is something you can't move. So this is just one piece of equipment. So we learned we needed to pivot on this, and for a reasonable price, we can create a dedicated space for music that fits into the mission of what we are trying to create, a state-of-the-art space for our students. We have been calling this bump out the piano wing. And I'm not sure if Ainsley is here yet, but she
am.
Ainsley, would you like to talk a little bit about the value that you saw in terms of fundraising and identifying this as a piano wing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, President Edmondson, and good morning. While this extension is really modest, it's really 3 piano priority practice spaces. We recognize that that perhaps by calling it something a little bit more grand, that there might be some interest and cachet amongst some donors, because our piano program has a very enthusiastic small donor base who sees it as a place of excellence within the excellence of the Osher School of Music. And that's been true. To date, we have over $800,000 of designated philanthropy just for this quote unquote piano wing. And so we realized that it created a little bit of confusion about what we were talking about, but it was really done for a philanthropic purpose, and philanthropy has followed, knowing that there would be some designated spaces that are piano priority.
So thank you, Ainsley. So we can go on to slide 5.
But Jackie,
Oh,
excuse
go
me
ahead.
for interrupting you, but could you go back to that slide? Because that slide is different than the one we have in our handout, in that it says 10.3 million construction inflation. The one we have in our materials is 14.3. And I think that's because the one we have was updated after the final cost came out.
That's correct.
Right.
Yes, you are correct. Thank you for catching that. This is the original slide that we presented, and then we updated them. So this is not the updated slide, but the committee should have those in their materials.
Right. It shows a total project cost of 63 million.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Yep. Thanks.
Okay, and if we could go on to slide 5. See if we have that there. Does this have the updated? Yes, this one's the updated one. Thank you so much. So please go to slide 4. And there's the 63 million.
Right. Yep.
That's correct. Thank you. Okay, and then with slide 5, basically, this is really to summarize. We see an increase due to inflation, which is not unusual, as much as we don't like it. That's what's happening in the country today. So at first, this was a $10.4 million increase. Now with our updated numbers, it is a $14.4 million increase. We are eager to move forward with this project right away so that we do not see any additional inflationary expenses. I want you to know we're committed to looking for ways to reduce the cost of borrowing, either through fundraising or the potential of selling real estate at higher than projected costs. Also, as I already explained, we are doing the piano and storage extension for about $4.1 million. And as Ainsley pointed out, we are already seeing a benefit in the fundraising narrative around this. And we managed through our due diligence to correct what had been an embarrassing mistake, which is why we do our due diligence. And we learned in the process that a printing press can't be moved. So this is what the design development process is all about. So on to slide 6, please. So from my first meeting before I became president, I got excited about this project. I'm excited to discuss this project with donors, to explain the vision for the University of Southern Maine, to explain the potential for what this could mean for our students well into the future. So what I'm seeing and hearing about this project is excitement in return. There are friends of the university who have been envisioning the Center for the Arts for more than 30 years, and people want to be part of making this long-held dream a reality. And while the project is sizable, it is smart and doable. And so Ryan and Ainsley, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add before we close.
I'd just like to touch on the financing piece really quickly. If maybe Heather, if you could go back one slide. Or yeah, so here we go. Again, just for the board's comfort, this is the four funding sources. They have been pretty consistent for quite some time. The numbers have fluctuated a little bit, as we've talked about, as the price has changed, but feel very comfortable about the revenue sources here. Certainly would defer to Ainsley on the philanthropy, and you can see the progress that's been made there. But the other 3 revenue sources I just want to touch on really quickly. $9 million comes from the revenue bond approved by the legislature last year. So again, recall the $75 million investment. 9 million of that was the USM share and would help fund a portion of this project. You see the 2 million that we would estimate from the sale of property at USM. We have appraisals for those. That is a very conservative estimate. We feel very comfortable about that. We think that may be an area where we potentially exceed our estimate and allows us to, again, reduce the financing necessary. And then finally, you see the financing piece. It is up to 23 million. It would not exceed 23 million. And the goal, as the president has outlined, and we've talked about before, is really to minimize that as much as we possibly can as we continue fundraising and look for other opportunities as well. So those are the funding sources. We feel very comfortable with those. And let me throw it to Ainsley on the philanthropy piece.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. This is a project that's seen unprecedented philanthropy. I think that there's no capital project at the University of Southern Maine that has raised this much money in the past. At first, when we thought that this was a smaller project, we projected that we could raise maybe $15 million over 5 years. And we raised more than $15 million in 18 months, where we increased our goal to $25 million with a $10 million next phase. And we're going to complete that by June 30th. And then my board voted last fall that we're going to continue fundraising as a key initiative for this project over the next 2 years while the building hopefully comes into being. And what we've learned from the McGoldrick Center is that once people see that something is really going to be a reality, that there are new people who are interested in being a part of it. We still have a lot of prominent naming opportunities that are available. And so we are confident that we'll be able to raise at least $4 million over the next 2 years. And our goal is to do everything we can to minimize the university's exposure through need to borrow more or to help alleviate debt service.
Thank you, Ainsley. And so in closing, I know this may seem extravagant to some people, and it is a big deal. Maine is changing. We're on the forefront of that change, but we're not ahead of it. Our university is situated in a hub of arts and culture, and these also are some of our defining areas of excellence. So I believe we're really riding a wave here. I know it feels like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, and I'm grateful to the Board of Trustees and the committee and to everyone who is being so diligent and asking us to justify the changes in the costs. And we hope the committee hears how everything we are presenting today is in service of the mission at USM and its future. I also am committed to USM being as transparent as we can be in arriving at these numbers, and I hope the committee can appreciate the changes and the reality of the inflationary environment in which we find ourselves. So ultimately today, we're asking the committee to recommend that the full board increase the authorization to expend up to $63 million to proceed with the construction of the Center for the Arts on the University of Southern Maine's Portland campus. This decision is formative as we look to the future of USM. In a challenging higher ed environment, this will set us apart. So more importantly, though, our students need this, our community needs this, and you are making an investment not just in USM, but in the system and in the state. So thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Questions of President Edmondson or the others on this issue? Yes, Emily. Trustee
Thank you.
King.
I just wanted to say I don't think there's any reason to be apologetic about bringing this back to us. This is an outstanding project with an outstanding plan, and you've raised a lot of money. And I think that there's no need to be apologetic about investing in an arts facility. It's why I went to the University of Maine the day I walked into the Collins Center. It's what draws people of all kinds to our campuses. And I think it's going to be awesome. And I just want to say congratulations, because I know it's been an immense amount of work, and you've brought in a lot of money that I think at a faster pace than a lot of people thought you could. And I just think it's a credit to the project. So congratulations.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks. Trustee Flood.
Thank you. Yeah, I kind of echo that. Art is, I'm not an art guy, but I know art and places for art need to look different. I mean, it's a whole different world. I mean, I understand that. I get that. But I'm also a finance guy. So my concerns were just understanding a little better. When I read part F in the information sent, it talks about financing from additional revenue sources. We're borrowing against our future revenues, I guess, and removing some debt service. Could Ryan, you just explain that in a little bit more detail to my simple mind? Thanks.
Yeah, piece this apart. Sorry, just making a couple of notes. Overall, there's 23 million in what we'll call internal borrowing as part of this proposal. It ends up being about 1.4 million a year in new debt service for the campus. The campus, as I think is mentioned in the A sheet, has a couple of large debt projects that are going to roll off. I think in 2024, those will no longer be necessary. So I think there's a debt service payment in there at $750,000 that will finish. So the resources from that will just be transferred over to this. And so the debt service obligations stay generally within where the campus is now. They do need to raise. The debt service payment is a little bit higher than that amount that's rolling off, and the campus has identified a couple of ongoing revenue streams that would then be dedicated to that debt service. So it should be, I don't want to say it's budget neutral, because it's clearly not. You could take those resources and plow them somewhere else, but just from a debt service perspective, we feel comfortable that the campus has identified the revenue streams that are necessary to pay down that. So I think I touched on all your questions there, Trustee Flood, but if I missed anything, please let me know.
Thank you. Other questions? I might point out, by the way, if we ever had a board talent show, Trustee Kane would win and Trustee Flood and I would finish last. For sure.
No, there's a role for everyone in the arts, Roger. There's a role for everyone,
That's right.
and I'm happy to help you find it.
Customer, yes. Thank you. Chair Riley. You're on mute.
You're muted.
Myself, that's really impressive, huh? I just want to echo Emily's points. This has been a long, long process to get to the details of this project. And I appreciate that we don't have the final number yet, and let's hope it goes down, but if it goes up, that there's a commitment to philanthropy to build in that. And that's a big commitment, and I applaud all the work that's gone on. It's exciting stuff and hard work. One quick question, at the risk of being Debbie Downer, I just wanted to point out to the board a contingent liability here. You do, in moving them out of Corthell, you mentioned in your proposal that you will at some point want to deal with Corthell. What's your timing for that, and what are the numbers? Do you know anything about what that would cost?
You're on mute, President Edmondson.
My apologies. Our plans are to move the theater faculty into Corthell Hall and then to look at renovations for Russell Hall into the future, but we don't have a timeline or costs on those just yet.
Thank you. Other questions? I don't see any. So a couple of thoughts, if I could. One is the motion that we're going to read doesn't refer to it, but the funding, I think it's pretty clear that how this gets funded is represented on that slide of the $63 million project. And hopefully the minutes will reflect that. I just wanted to say that this has been before FFT several times now, and we've had numerous discussions about the size and shape of the building and about the cost of the project. And unfortunately, every time we've had that discussion, through nobody's fault, the inflation of construction has gone up and up, and there's nothing we can do about that. But this project's gotten a lot of scrutiny. It is really an exciting project for sure, for all the reasons that both President Edmondson and Ainsley Wallace have outlined. And as the chair said, the level of philanthropy is incredibly impressive here. And the foundation's commitment to raise even more is what's really making this project go forward. So thank you for all that hard work over a number of years as this has taken to get to this point. So unless there's further comment, I'm going to read the text of a proposed resolution that the Finance, Facilities and Technology Committee approves the following resolution to be forwarded to the Board of Trustees approval for the board's approval at the March 26, 27, 23 meeting, that the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities and Technology Committee and authorizes the University of Southern Maine, acting through the University of Maine system, to increase the authorization to expend up to $63 million to proceed with the construction of the Center for the Arts on the University of Southern Maine's Portland campus, and to increase the campus square footage by, I think it should be 4,000 square feet. Is that? Well, let me stop there. I apologize. I hadn't read that proposed resolution carefully. Are we getting to a total of 40,000 square feet?
Yes, that is the right number.
All right. I'm going to read the whole thing over again. I apologize. I just want to make sure the record's clear. Because there's one word wrong in here. That the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendations of the Finance, Facilities and Technology Committee and authorizes the University of Southern Maine, acting through the University of Maine system, to increase the authorization to expend up to $63 million to proceed with the construction of the Center for the Arts on the University of Southern Maine's Portland campus, and to increase the campus square footage to 40,000 gross square feet. Does that now sound right to you, President Edmondson? Yes,
Yes, it does.
okay, thank you. Is there such a motion?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Moved by trustee Kane and seconded by trustee Riley. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
trustee Kane,
Yes.
trustee Flood,
Yes,
trustee McMahon,
Yes.
trustee Riley.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
Congratulations, and I guess you don't call it this, but we'll look forward to opening day.
Indeed, we will. Thank you all so very much.
All right, moving on to our next agenda item at tab 5. It's I think a lot of us are really looking forward to this. The FY22 philanthropy overview. We're going to hear presentations from Jeffrey Mills, who's the president and CEO of the University of Maine Foundation, as well as Ainsley Wallace, who we just heard from. I don't know how the two of you wanted to proceed in your order, so go ahead and start.
We are presenting together as
Oh.
we like to work together. So
And welcome, Jeff.
Yes. And I just have to say, this is the best lead-in to this philanthropy update.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know we've moved on from the agenda item, but I just want to extend my thanks to the committee for your support and your kind words about this project. It just means so much. And I know that our donors are going to be really thrilled. So what a great way to start a conversation about philanthropy. So, so as Trustee Cates shared, Jeff Mills and I are the two leaders of the two staffed university foundations within the system. And that the UMaine Foundation and the USM Foundation. Well, that's not exactly the way I wanted to share that. I don't know if someone else wants to be able to share. Otherwise, I will just give you a little peek under the curtain. All right. So so this morning, Jeff and I are looking forward to giving you some updates about where we are philanthropically, some national and regional trends that the trustees should be aware of and hopefully will be interested in. And then there are 3 things that we want you to walk away from our presentation today with. And Jeff, do you want to talk about the first one?
yes, well, I would say good people and recognized nationally is the first big takeaway. You can see Ainsley's some of her accomplishments and credentials, the size of her institution there. I have to say, many of you know, with USM fundraising, there was kind of some difficult times. It was kind of known as the lost decade. And there were some great people that were with the leaders of the foundation, but they were not professionally trained in fundraising. It is incredibly great to have somebody of Ainsley's qualities and professionalism, as we like to say. She not only is a good person, but it is a profession, and you need a pro for such a thing. And she is, and so she has been again recognized nationally for her work at USM, and it is great to see all the things that are happening there.
Yeah, and Jeff has won awards every place he's led. And most recently, it's a big deal that he won the 2022 Case Common Fund College and University Foundation Award. And so we just want for the trustees in the system to be proud of the advancement operations that are happening here. We're both aspiring to be best practice shops. And yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I just wanted to say, I also wanted to celebrate, and I know that you probably have already been talking a lot about this, but with our 2 locations, many of you know 30 years ago, we were up on UMaine Foundation, and other offices for UMaine were on Congress Street. We had to move out of that area because at that time it was considered dangerous and hard to believe. Porches closed, everything else in that area. We went down to the mall area. Then we went over to Falmouth, and I guess I'm getting old enough now where things circle back around. So it's great to be able to be back downtown in the new building. So it's a very exciting piece as we move forward.
The second takeaway that we hope that you'll leave with is that we're at all-time highs. We are both coming off of the largest campaigns in our histories, and we're coming off of record fundraising years that are all in the context of a global pandemic. And so an important kind of related note is that we are two very different organizations, just like the universities that we serve are really different universities. So you can see some of that difference here. There's a difference in longevity. There's a difference in size. The UMaine has a separate alumni association. USM does not have a separate alumni association. So and our donor base is a little bit different, as you'll see. And Jeff?
On to the next one, or anything else? Only other point we wanted to make under that is that we all use campaign with our campaigns. We use best practices. That is so critical. We'll talk a little bit more about the 3 phases of a campaign, but basically, I think most of you know from our presentations before, you traditionally have the silent phase, which is your planning stages. Then you go to your quiet phase, where you start moving in from your feasibility study and working with your donors to get your gifts. And then the final phase is your public phase, when you have the majority of your gifts. It's often talked about as similar to running a marathon. You kind of hit that wall. You want to get over it, you go public, and you use that public momentum to get you to the final stage of your campaign. We completed the largest campaign, 208 million. We began the silent phase and working with Transforms. Transforms is really unusual. We'll talk about a little bit more about that in a moment, with some of the great pieces to that and some of the challenges. But the important piece that is not on this slide that we want you to all to realize is that we were also asked by the Chancellor to come in to help with the restructuring of the leadership for the first phase of the Maine Center. We came in, worked together on that campaign, and completed it just in time for the timetable that had to be done and over goal. So it's a real testament to being able to work together, and also with the staffing that was there at the time for the UMaine School of Law Foundation.
Yeah, and that's really our third point, is that, as we continue to follow best practices, we can plan and work together to ensure that philanthropy is an important part of the mix for the university system. One thing I would note about the current campaign that USM is wrapping up is that this started out as a 5-year campaign. And because of our early momentum and success, we accelerated it just to 3 years. And we hope that after a couple of years of some interim fundraising, that we'll be able to launch our next, the quiet phase of our next campaign. So, Trustee Riley had mentioned that talking about the sources and uses of our gifts would be helpful, and how that compares to national trends. And so, so here is where our gifts come from. And, there are a couple of common misconceptions or questions that come up when you look at this type of a chart. For instance, if you look at the University of Southern Maine Foundation, you might say, wow, only 4% of gifts are from alumni. And this is percentage in terms of dollars raised, not in terms of number of gifts. Jeff, what's another thing that you hear when people look at the sources of your gifts?
Corporate giving is one of them. So we're at our breakout is, and you'll see in a moment, compared to national averages, is about 4%. Is about 4 times the national average for an institution with a flagship institution. You'll see it here. This is the slide from Indiana Center for Philanthropy that we had when they came. The president worked with us to split the cost of having them come here on campus. So I would say that's one of the bigger ones. Tremendous amount of that we'll see over the next few years. I think even more so with our president being the vice president for research. She has just invested more money in Jake Ward's area for us to be coordinating. We're going to be meeting monthly for tours, other things, Gateway program down in Portland, other things that we'll be able to get more people to understand the research and other partnerships that we will have with the university names. But I would say that's the other one. If you go back to the other slide too for a second. The other question that often comes up is, what's your mix of the alumni and friends? We're at approximately, we are at exactly 25% of our gifts now come from non-alums. So if you were looking at, nationally, what would you want your pie chart to look like for a flagship institution? It would be pretty hard to not draw it up pretty much close to what it is now. You want the majority at a flagship campus, 44% of ours to come from alums, 25% is from non-alums, because we are a state flagship research university. We have a tremendous amount of people that are not alums that want to be involved with us, because we like to say we're everybody's university. So I would say that. And the other one that comes up a lot is unrestricted giving. Unrestricted giving, if you go to the next slide, we're actually a little bit above the national average in unrestricted giving, which is most institutions, it's becoming less than 1%. And that's for several reasons. The major ones are that everybody, especially at a flagship campus, can find something to designate their gift to that they want, usually. Number two is that everybody is being asked to fundraise everywhere. So you go out, you get your donors, you work with your deans, your directors, your others, and then the other is the university priorities, like with the Alphon Challenge. All of that is restricted money for all of those matches that we have to make is totally in the restricted areas. So a lot of people are always surprised by that. It doesn't mean we don't want to raise unrestricted money. We love to have unrestricted money. I was just speaking at the national conference for Association of Governing Boards, and our chair, Bob Strong, was there with me. The group I was speaking at was for foundations that have $250,000 to $1 million state funded institutions. We had 323 people in the room. I said, Bob, this is a great chance for us to just poll the room. So we asked all of the organizations that were in the room, the 323 of them, do any of you have a different makeup than 99% of restricted gifts? Nobody in the room rose their hand. I said, I just want to make sure I didn't say it in a way that you didn't understand. So I'm going to ask it the other way. Is there anybody who has more than 1% of restricted versus unrestricted? Do you have bigger than 1% of your gifts that come in unrestricted? Not a single person out of that group rose their hand. If you take a look at the top piece, we just redid our polling of this last week since we did this slide. It's actually gone down a little bit with the New England land grants, but we're actually outperforming that average by a little bit for all of them. But that's probably one of the other most common misunderstood pieces. And then the other one would be, I don't know if you got the other slide up there, percentage of alumni giving. This is the other one that comes up a lot, especially because of U.S. News and World Report with others, and they'll say, oh my gosh, only 6% of your alums at UMaine give. It's probably, particularly with people that are new to boards and other things, I always come in and do a presentation. It's probably one of the biggest shockers, because people that are on the boards could not be more dedicated people and love the institutions. So they just assume that the vast majority of people that go to college give back every year. This number continues to trickle down just a little bit. When I first got involved in the business, it was closer to 9, a little bit over 9%. It keeps going down because people are living longer and you're having larger graduating classes. So your denominator just keeps going down just a little bit. That doesn't mean, which some people get down by this when I mention it, that doesn't mean we wouldn't raise more money. We're raising more money with those people, and we also are getting more gifts, and you're having more donors. It's just that your percentage is going down. Hopefully I explained that in a way you understand. I might not have. I hope I did. So I think when I presented this last time, people were like, oh my gosh, and I didn't clarify that it means more money, but we have to be a lot smarter on how we do it. A lot of people always want to know with our campaigns, how much are you going to invest in new gift officers? We need gift officers, there's no doubt about it, but you have to have your research department, your stewardship departments, all of those people, places and people are going to be more and more critical for us to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff as we move forward with our profession.
Yeah, Yeah, and I want to jump into that sort of misconception as well, because for a university like USM, there are so many individuals who are motivated to give who are not alumni or parents. Just like Jeff was saying, that the way that people are motivated to give to a flagship, our donor base is different because USM started as a normal school, a teacher's college. It's a university that's founded on access as well as excellence. And so that means that the profile of our alumni base is more varied. And Jeff and I were talking about how when he was at Monmouth in the past, he used to talk about how great cities have great universities. And that's actually what USM's current campaign is all about. It's called the Great University Campaign, because there are a lot of people who are motivated to give to a place that like USM because of what it stands for, either because of its proximity to the sort of cultural and economic hub of Maine, and because of wanting to support places that give first generation students the opportunity to change their story. And so so some people can look at these numbers and feel like, oh, that's depressing. But it's actually, there's a lot of possibility. Like Jeff said, we just have to be smart and understand what motivates people to give to these type of universities.
I just want to clarify, as much as I love Maine, when she says Monmouth, she means Monmouth University in New Jersey, next to New York City. I do realize that Monmouth is not a city in Maine. So I just want to make sure people realize that, as great as it is.
So looking at how our gifts are used, like Jeff said, it's really normal, and it's a philanthropic trend that gifts are highly designated because donors they have a philanthropic intention that they're trying to fulfill. And for both of our schools, a lot of this has to do with student scholarship support. What you'll see with the USM Foundation is that these results right now are skewed because of the current campaign, because of the Center for the Arts and the McGoldrick Center. That's why there's a lot of capital giving. Typically, I would say that our percentage of support for student scholarships is about what UMaine's is. And then people give to support programs. They give to support, academic programs that inspired them, athletic programs. Jeff, anything else that you would say about?
The other thing that often comes up when I show this chart is people say, other charities, what are you doing helping other charities? That's often other campus setups that do not have active gift processing throughout the system. It often in tremendous amount of your largest gifts come from planned gifts, which are usually in a will, and we will be the largest gift in the will, but somebody will say, and I also want part of that to go to the Girl Scouts or the Boy Scouts or somewhere else. So we help those charities process those gifts and get them out. So we're not in the business of going out, and we stay focused on what our mission is, but we're not going to turn down large gifts because of the fact that a small amount of it might be going to another charity.
And like Jeff already mentioned, while it can be compelling to think like, oh, let's just raise more unrestricted dollars, that's not typically the way that donors want to give. But what we both do is we work with our donors to establish funds that give the university maximum flexibility while honoring donor intent. So for instance, if someone comes in with a really narrowly defined purpose, we talk with the leadership of the university and we figure out what would make this more practical and more useful for the university. And donors tend to be really open to that conversation about how they can be most helpful within the area that they care most about. It's hard to convince someone to support something that's really dramatically different than what they already care about, but most people want to do the most good with the gifts that they give.
Great. Here's some of the areas that we help with the Alumni Association. That's not our overall mission, but we do support it because it is a feeder friends group that helps us with it. We have executive clubs. What's the difference between an executive club and an alumni club? An executive club is made up of people that are donors that are invited or potential donors. So that's what makes up that group. They are made up with the idea also that they have a scholarship that they support if they're a member of that club regionally. So it's based on giving. Many people often confuse it with an alumni type group. And I'd say that's the other thing that often happens too. We have many programs that are for younger donors. And that's where you're going to build, particularly in Maine, diversity and all of those types of things for giving. But you have to remember the national average for a major gift is 25 to 30 years out of college. And then for your principal gifts, and planned gifts, it's 60 years and above. Some people sometimes go to our largest donor events and then afterwards say to me, gee, I didn't see anybody that was under whatever age or something else. So it depends on what function you're at. We have President's Club, Senior Giving Program, all of those things that are building toward that. But in the meantime, for ROI purposes, so that doesn't mean you don't have diversity and try to build on that at those events. You do that through your student speakers, your other people that might be there, anybody who happens to be an outlier in that group. But the vast majority of people in the room are not going to be of that makeup for the ROI for that type of an event.
Yeah, and for the University of Southern Maine, about 70% of our alumni live within 100 miles of the university. So we use happenings that are at USM and in Southern Maine as opportunities to sort of piggyback and engage both alumni and friends more deeply. So we do some of the same things that Jeff mentioned. Because we don't have a separate alumni association, we do targeted alumni engagement and also friend engagement. We're doing more geographic cultivation, like Jeff was talking about with executive clubs, and every year we're getting a little bit more sophisticated in how we deepen relationships with a lean staff.
Great. I know we're tight on time, so boom, boom, boom. Yeah. So some of the groups that questions there are, what about the transforms? What do we know that we believe count toward that in our process? We just had the largest gift in athletics come through from Phil and Sue Morse. Rod Sparrow gave, if any of you go to Home Depot and you see those orange buckets, that's his company. And when he gave the gift, he said, everybody says to me, is that all you do is buckets? And he said, yeah, it's worked out pretty well for me. John Weber, we're working with his brother-in-law, John Diamond, and his nephew, Steve Spettingale, on that gift. That's actually another $1 million that's going to the library also, but we're not sure where that may or may not fit as far as the Alphonse, so we're holding back on that right now. We're trying to be conservative to make sure they all fit within those buckets. Literally buckets.
And then, as you all know, the date is off of this. On January 30th, we announced a gift from the Avangrid Foundation that to benefit the Muskie School of Public Service, and it's particularly focused on graduate education. So we're excited about that recent gift that squarely fits within the Alphonse interests as well.
So the other important thing we want to make sure in the little time we have left that people understand is, so you heard President Edmondson talk about hope and prayer campaigns where they're not based on going through the traditional phases of a campaign, feasibility study, all of that type of thing. The transform piece skipped over that. So you might say, wow, that means it's going to be a prayer campaign, a hope and a dream. No, it's not. Why do we feel confident about that? Because number one, why did we skip over those areas? The Alphons are on a time period. They have to give their money away under certain restrictions. That doesn't require certain amounts, but minimums, yes. But you don't want to miss that rotation. So we had to move forward with getting that gift on the timetable that worked for them. So the amazing thing about this gift, and from everything we've checked with Indiana, with the Center for Philanthropy, Arizona State, my other institution, Alexander Haas, our national consultants, they're not aware of any campaign ever that has been done in the country where you're counting all revenue sources towards the match. So thanks to the leadership of the Chancellor, Joan, trustees, the Alphons, this will be the first time in the country where that type of thing is done. I think it will happen a lot more in the future. And so that's why we're where we are, but we have to get the cart back in front of the horse a little bit as we're doing the planning stage because of all of those things to make sure that we are doing the right pieces with that campaign.
Yeah, and so going forward, we Jeff and I talk a lot about how we want to ensure that philanthropy is part of the solution for the system in tight budget times, and that just as he mentioned, that there are some things for us to keep in mind, that philanthropy is not an overnight matter. And so when we talk about, oh, we want, like President Edmondson and I've been talking about, how do we grow scholarships so there's less scholarship money needed from the E&G budget? And that's a multi-year process of building an endowment and building donor relationships, soliciting gifts, and then the gifts get paid over time so that that can happen. So we've been talking about that as like, oh, what do we want to see like 3 years out, 5 years out? And so it's good for us to have these conversations earlier about what we want to achieve several years out. And that when we're brought in the early planning stages, then we're able to make sure that our goals and ambitions are aligned with our donors' interests and intent. And then something that I so appreciate about the University of Southern Maine right now is, you know, in these tight budget times, that we're still talking about how do we make sure that we don't replicate what happened a little bit after USM's last campaign, which is that right after the campaign, that there was a dramatic, you know, there were some tough times and there was a dramatic cut in advancement. And now I think that our current campaign would probably be twice as large if we hadn't scaled back at that time, because we've had to do a lot of rebuilding. And so it's really when we adequately fund advancement, it means that we can grow philanthropy over time.
So you could bring in national consultants, and we have with our own shop, if they were looking at the system just for fundraising. I know you've had some in for strategic planning. We can save you some money, I think, right now. If you wanted to know what I think the overall report would say is that our two foundations are nationally recognized and the leadership within them, that there's no way you can do the largest campaign ever in the university system's history by far with the same resources you have now. You're going to have to put more money into the revenue sources. And my biggest point of all, for those who have not seen it, I don't know if she's here, if she probably is, Lee Softly, who is our Black Bear Alumnus of the Year. That's my biggest concern, probably, if you were to ask me, and if you had a national consultant come in, would say the biggest issue that we have is beyond the two that I just mentioned, which are mostly good and in good shape, is that Lee Softly's foundation, a law school has to have a planned giving piece, has to have major gifts, and it has to have annual fund at a minimum. And all she's got is an annual fund. That is my biggest concern. When I was at our cabinet meeting last week, they asked me my biggest concern and where I would see the investment. I said, Maine Center, with the leadership there, and everybody was like, what are you talking about? Why would you say that? Because it's in USM's interest, our interest, everybody's interest. If we do not have that law school properly working, we'll be called in again, like we were with the last phase, to take over that. And that takes us away from all the other priorities that we've got spinning. We still help with that campaign. We need to be involved with that campaign, but Lee needs that support for that law school to be at a level that it should be for a flagship type institution of a law school. So the last thing I just wanted to say, I always like to say when I'm at the homecoming with the end of the day, if you take a look at Maine, where we are now with fundraising, with what's been done by the Chancellor, Joan, the trustees, the Alphons, I believe 20 years from now, this First in the Nation campaign will be the standard, just as campaigns used to be 5 years for capital only projects, and now they've moved to comprehensive fundraisers and usually are 8 years case average. I think it will be all revenue sources because that's what it's going to take to get these projects done. I think it would be the same, Ainsley would say, with USM. They would not have gotten the support they got if it wasn't for that bond. We never would have got the Furlan support. They came right out and said it when we first met with them for the 78 million engineering facility. They said, come back and see us when you're real. Well, when we got that $50 million from the state, thanks to especially our good friend John Lisnick and others that worked on that, Then he came to the table with the 10 million. So I always end with, when I'm talking there, our motto is Dirigo I lead. As Maine goes, so goes the nation. And with this campaign, we will do that. Well, there, gee.
And we welcome your comments or questions.
Well, thank you. I was just getting off mute. Thank you very much. That was more than interesting. I think we all learned a lot. We're on schedule. We have time for a few minutes of questions or comments. If you wouldn't mind taking down that slide and we can see, does anybody have a comment or a question? Yes, Chair Riley.
Thank you, Chair Cates. This is fascinating, and I've learned, I was on Jeff's board, so I learned all the ins and outs and the complexity of fundraising. I'm concerned as we move to more online learners that our reliance on alums might become challenged over time. But can you both speak a little bit? We see your incredible value when we build new buildings, be it the engineering building or the Performing Arts Center. Can you speak a little bit as we think about the budget crunch before us? How much of this money each year goes to the university? And how might we think creatively about, maintaining the autonomy of the 501c3, but also thinking about, given the current priorities and crises at each of the universities, where might we be more aggressive and be able to provide funding now?
And I'll speak from my perspective and then toss it to Jeff. I think that the way I think about philanthropy, Chair Riley, is that it's meant to be budget relieving and budget enhancing. And it's budget enhancing in the types of projects that we're doing right now, when we sort of colloquially joke that we help USM have nice things. And I think that that's the type of philanthropy that you're talking about. But it's also budget relieving. A big part of what we've been doing at the university this budget cycle is looking at how we replace scholarships that are donor funded and swap them out for E&G funded scholarships. And then how we use gift funds that haven't been spent for a long time, which is not good donor stewardship practice, and ensure that they get spent so then we can go and report back to donors that they're being used and then replenish those. So I think that two of the places that there is most potential for budget relief are around scholarships and then around like departmental annual gift funds, those type of pieces. I think that also, as we talk about in named professorships and endowed chairs, that we need to look at, is this, like we've talked about before, how can gifts then offset expenditures that the university is already planning on taking on instead of add additional burden? So those are a couple of the places that I see philanthropy being ripe for helping in tight funding times. Jeff?
How much, Ainsley, and how much goes to the university? How much of the scholarship is a good example? How much actually goes every year to the university? What kind of revenue does the university see from the foundations each year?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. And I don't have those numbers at my fingertips, but I can send them to you afterwards. It's really quite impressive. I mean, every month we transfer, many dollars over to the university. And so I can get you a more specific number afterwards.
Yeah, that came up at our cabinet discussion too. And so we're going to poll the New England's, others. We'll get those numbers for you. I don't think you'll see any major surprises there. The thing that I would say that, again, there was a chance at AGB with Bob in the room. We asked, are any of you using your endowment somehow to do current budget gaps or anything like that? And nobody raised their hand, and they all said that, of course, you don't take your revenue producers, your long-term investments, your donor invested funds to do budget gap funding. So that's, if you're asking about budget gaps, that's one thing. But if you're looking at the long-term stability of an institution, the endowment growth, making sure it's targeted better, what you need for priority giving, the quicker we can get those priorities figured out and the budgets for transforms and beyond, that will help us to be able to try to get those donors to hopefully give to those areas. If we have a good case for support, get to them early in the campaign. The quicker you can do that is better. And the last is like with the chancellor came to us a few last year, looking at ways that we can leverage the endowment in a way that is not irresponsible as a fiduciary of those funds. And that is that if we can get an average rate or better return on loans for you, that we would get for things that we invest in for our cash, all those other areas. So we looked at and improved 20 million for the chancellor at that time to try to move forward with purchasing the building. Unfortunately, CIEE was not interested in selling at that time, but those types of things that we can do that goes along with the fiduciary responsibilities that we have for all of the donors' funds that are there forever, that we have to watch out for in a way that's responsible.
Other questions? Let me ask you both one, and it relates as well to those endowments. So 412 million for University of Maine, and I guess 33 plus for University of Southern Maine. What is the policy or stated philosophy with respect to how those endowments are handled, and particularly how annual gain, assuming there is gain, are handled? Is that just growing generally? Is there a policy about spending some of it? How does that work?
Yeah, we follow the systems policy for spending. I'm sure you do too, probably, Ainsley, correct? And same thing you do with the funds that you hold at the system. We do a 12-year rolling average, monthly average type of thing, which helps out to smooth out the flow. We use the same for that. And we also, the fee off of the fund is the same as the national average, which is 1.25, which has been the same here, I think, for 5 decades. So yeah, we basically follow the system's recommendations on all that. And by the way, in case people don't know, every single fund before it's approved has to be approved by the campus president and the system office, and how we manage it, and we audit, and our audit has to time out with the system audit so that it's double protected through an auditing system. So just in case you're ever worried about, these people over there that are, going crazy with all this piles of money that are just sitting there, or any of those types of things that are there.
Now, Jeff, my question is more general than that. $412 million endowment. How do you decide, and under what principles do you decide what you're going to do with that?
That's all by the process of when we meet with the donor. For all of our major gifts, principal gifts, all of those things, we work almost always with either the president, dean, or whomever's doing that gift with us, and then the donor's preferences. And we protect those donors' preferences. That's our donor bill of rights. We have to go by the national donor bill of rights, which is how all universities, foundations function. And we have to protect that those funds are being used the way that the donor's intent is. That's what we are here for. Forever is a long time. And you always put precautions in. Each one of those agreements, according to system policy, says at the end that if you ever get rid of, like, home ec or whatever it might be, that working with the president of the institution and the board, you will come up with what that agreed upon new fund the old money would be used for in the future.
Ainsley?
Yeah, so those are the Chair Cates, those are the 99% restricted funds that Jeff and I were talking about. So something in USM's case, we're at about 37.5 million right now, which is actually a significant decrease, not due to the market drop, but because actually about $5 million was transferred over to the new Osher Map Library Foundation, which is another great example of the way that we work with donors to make sure that they're accomplishing what they want to accomplish with their gifts. And so those funds have been long held as part of the USM Foundation's endowment. But then when the new foundation was established for the Osher Map Library, we actually relinquished those. And so my goal is to get us up over $45 million, because that's kind of the next asset class for a regional university. And I take great heart in the fact that the UMaine Foundation was here maybe 25 years ago. And so we look to where UMaine has grown with their endowment, and are taking a long view of how we get there too.
And again, those have to be approved by both the system and the campus president. And so what we also put in there, ever since I have been here is that every single one, we ask the donor whether we can invade principal or not, because we want to make sure MIFA allows that now after 2008, but we want to know from every donor that we can find out. We also audit 10%. We're up to 10% auditing now, which is something that really wasn't implemented here when I was here before. And so we check with those, and now with the new software package that the system is invested with the financial aid office, we'll be able to even better track are there scholarships that for restrictive reasons are not getting out there. And so we'll be able to, for those that either have a representative or are still living, we can go back and explain why those scholarships are not getting out, and we are able to change them.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Any other questions?
Well, one more thing I do want to say, the new
Yes.
software package that the system invested in for financial aid, we were lucky if we got 9 to 10% of the students to write a thank you note. We're now up over in 1 year's time with that new system, over 56% getting a note through that new software system to the donor. Incredible. Thank you so much for the investment.
Hey, okay. Thank you. Anything else? Hopefully we can make this at least an annual event to have this discussion with you. This has been, it's been
We
terrific.
have been doing it the last few years. I appreciate it since Chair Riley had asked it, and I think it's very, very helpful for
Right.
everybody.
So do we. So thank you. If seeing no further questions, why don't we take a brief break? We're a little bit behind. Why don't we come back right at 10 o'clock? And we will reconvene on the agenda. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Alan, do we have a quorum back? I think we do. Yes, good. All right, well, we'll return to the agenda then. And we are now up to tab 6, which is another annual review. We have, and this is the Gordian Annual Facilities Report for fiscal year 22. And I think Gretchen Catlin, who's the Chief Facilities and General Services Officer, is going to lead us through that part of it. Those materials are, again, at tab 6. Gretchen?
Thank you, Trustee Cates. I am joined today by my colleagues, Carolyn McDonough and Nate Harris of Capital Planning and Project Management, as well as Emily Morris, who is the Senior Account Manager and Area Lead for Gordian's Facilities Planning Services Department. The University of Maine system has been working with Gordian and Emily since 2007. And Emily is actually going to walk us through Gordian's annual facilities benchmarking and analysis findings for the University of Maine system facilities and facilities management operations. She will touch on some key metrics such as density, which were previously adopted by the Board of Trustees. While the entire report is in your slide deck for review, in the interest of time, Emily is going to review selected slides during her presentation. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Emily.
Hey, Emily, thanks very much. A lot of this is fairly dense and some technical language in here. So I'm going to encourage committee members, if you have questions as we go along, because this is very important material, please feel free to, is that okay with you, Emily, if we just ask questions as you go along?
Absolutely.
Okay, and again, the slide's up on the screen, so trustees, if you have a question, just speak up because I can't see you. So having said that, go ahead and welcome.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share the executive highlights of our fiscal year 22 analysis. I appreciate your time today and just really appreciate being able to join a little bit early and see all the great work that others are doing within the system. As many of you know, each campus is assigned a dedicated Gordian team, which is in charge of collecting, quantifying, and then presenting campus-specific analytics ahead of this information at the system level. So just quick remarks on who Gordian is. An international facilities firm, we really focus on higher education, although we're extending into other markets such as healthcare and local and state governments. We have a robust membership within the higher ed industry, colleges, universities, consortiums, as well as several other state systems. And we really want to focus on bridging the gap between facilities and finance through a common vocabulary, a consistent methodology, and then able to build credibility with that data through benchmarking analytics. So we're here today to present the ROPA analysis, or the return on physical assets. And so each year we collect, with the help of all of your teams, a tremendous amount of data that's really pertinent and links to one of these 4 areas. And by collecting the data in this way, we're allowing, it really allows us and hopefully you all to understand the relationship between the space inventory, the capital investment, as well as operations at each of the campuses. And the idea is that we would uncover opportunities to really optimize each of those resources. The data should really make you all feel empowered to create a case for change and really create alignment from the boardroom to the boiler room. The presentation today is really going to focus on the UMaine system, but also within the context of what's going on at other colleges and universities within higher ed. And so a lot of these factors that I'm going to highlight on this slide we're seeing at many other universities across the country. So decreasing campus populations, the building assets aging over time, and with that comes converging system life cycles. It was mentioned earlier, the escalating construction costs and what that means to keep up with those life cycle needs as they're coming due. And then just in addition to that, the overall increasing operational demands to properly maintain the space that goes right along with those inflation parameters. And so throughout this presentation, we'll be highlighting the UMaine system data in comparison to the Gordian database of public higher ed institutions. And so I mentioned some of those challenging factors that the UMaine system is facing were also being felt at many other colleges and universities across the country. And so the world has really changed from 3 years ago, pre-pandemic. And as a result, we're seeing a growing backlog with really record rates. And in addition to this, the amount of college-age students is declining. And so this decrease will continue over the next decade. And you can see from the quote listed on the bottom right-hand side, fewer students just reduces the resources available to address the high need buildings. And so we're really asking a difficult question to all of our members. What will be the UMaine strategy moving forward, specifically around space management to help alleviate some of these challenges? And so on slide here, we're looking at the gross square footage over time from 2013 fiscal year 13 through fiscal year 22. And you can see it's relatively stable. There's been strategic efforts through board policy as well as at each individual campus that has really allowed the UMaine system to take buildings offline. That's really slowed the rate of growth of some of those challenges that I just highlighted. We did mention several new buildings that will be coming online in the future. And I think that's okay. That's needed for recruitment and engagement of the students. But it's something to keep in mind, the resources available to take care of those new spaces over time specifically, and what potentially other tired buildings at the campuses can come on offline. Another important metric we want to look at is density. So I mentioned campus populations. Density factor is really a measure of how building your system is in relation to the physical space across the UMaine system. So this is looking at FTEs for faculty, students, and staff. And it's really important to understand this because it's connected to both the operations, day-to-day running of the physical plant, as well as more strategic opportunities for campus utilization. And so you can see here, the UMaine system is at 298 users per 100,000 gross square feet. It's been decreasing over time. To give a little bit of perspective, selective liberal arts colleges are on average of 150 users per 100,000 square feet. Comprehensive use research institutions are around 450, and then community colleges can be upwards of 1,200 users per 100,000 square feet. And so, as I mentioned, this is really a challenge being faced by many higher ed institutions across the country, specifically in the Northeast area. And it was an issue before the pandemic, but that's only exacerbated the situation. And so birth rates show that this trend is not likely to reverse significantly in the next decade. And so, really, again, space management. What does this mean for the buildings and the assets needed on campus to support the students that will be enrolling? And this is going to be a focus. It was mentioned earlier, the transition to more remote learning online courses. And so we really are going to dive into this in future years.
Emily, the interim goal and the long-term goal, those numbers, where do those come from?
Yep. So that was some KPIs that the board set in place at this point. I think it was around 2015. So it's been several years to overall increase the density of or the utilization of the different campuses across the system.
So those numbers were put in place by a previous board?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
And so another challenge facing higher ed is those physical assets aging over time and the deferred maintenance that has accumulated in those spaces. So slide 13 is really looking at the dark blue area representing the construction of all the buildings across the Gordian database. You can see two major spikes across the industry, the first being in the post-war modern era, and the second being in the complex era. So each of your campuses are slightly different, but in general, following a similar trend. And those two waves are really bringing simultaneous life cycles needs on each of the campuses. And so those needs are stacking up on each other. Those oldest buildings are reaching their second life cycle and beyond, and the buildings that are relatively relatively new because they were built within this century are starting to hit life cycles for the first time. And so those financial demands to replace the life cycles coming due are compounding. And so that yellow line is really that representation of the UMaine system space. And so again, following a similar trend. And so the financial demands that we're seeing at other institutions are similarly being felt within the main campuses. So it's just not about construction age. Another way to think about aging is the renovation of a building. And so this is the last time since a major renovation essentially reset the clock on a building's life. And so this graph is looking at by campus, the weighted construction age versus the weighted renovation age. As a system, the UMaine system has offset 6 years through a renovation strategy. And you can see the different campuses have applied this approach more or less so within their buildings.
Emily, I'm sorry again. Maybe I'm the only one who doesn't understand the slide. So what does the 56 and the 50 mean over on the far right for the system as a whole?
Sure. So the 56 is looking at if you took the weighted age of the buildings within the UMaine system when they were constructed, the average age would be 56. There has been major renovations across some of those spaces. So again, as a weighted average, that age has decreased to 50 through renovations.
So we got 56-year-old buildings that look like 50-year-old buildings.
Correct. And that's really important from the next slide because any building that's more than 25 years old has enhanced risk of failure if life cycles aren't addressed. And so again, the average age given the renovations is still 50 years old. So the older buildings have systems coming due. Those systems cost more, and those costs are really driven up because systems are coming due. The estimated cost to modernize those buildings increase as a space ages, as well as just the escalating construction costs. And so this graph is really looking at the Gordian database capital cost on $1 per square foot basis in 4 distinct age groups, under 10, 10 to 25, 25 to 50, and over 50. And you can see the percent of the UMaine system space underneath each of those bars. So again, the majority of space over 50 followed very closely by buildings 25 to 50 years old using that renovation age. So in total, 72% of the UMaine system building inventory is over 25 years old, and those just cost more to maintain and have replacements of life cycles.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Pat, go ahead.
I was going to say that my question had to do with this particular slide that you're on. Is this an analysis of what it would cost to actually fix the UMS buildings, or is this a national database type of calculation?
This is a national database type calculation. And so and this is annual mean. So it would be dollars times square footage times the age of the building, if you will, for total replacement. But again, annual database dollars.
Pat, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Emily, my question, it's a little late. I'm going back to this density. I'm kind of confused by that. I understand that term, you're measuring how many students in square feet. And what I'm not understanding is, are we talking, when we're measuring these buildings and our use of the buildings, are we talking about all students or just remote students, or a combination of remote and on-site students? Because it seems like that would skew the data significantly. How are we measuring in this new wave of learning with a lot of online learning? Have we changed the way we measure it, or are these apples to apples is my question.
Right. So this graph is apples to apples year over year. It is currently looking at all it's being calculated by credit hours. So FTEs as defined by the UMaine system based off of credit hours, including all credit hours. And so it does include remote and distant learning currently. So if we were to take that component out, these numbers would shift downward. And that's what we're going to focus on more starting next year within the analysis and what that means to this particular metric.
Okay, thank you. It would just seem to me that you would need to do that because you don't need great big buildings to do remote learning. And so it seems to me like the measurement going forward, it won't make sense to continue to do it the same way. That you've already acknowledged that, and as you go forward, you're going to be looking at it differently.
Correct. Pre-2020, it didn't necessarily make that much of a difference. Fiscal year 21 across the database, we made the strategic decision not to offset the FTEs being calculated based off of remote learning because it was at the time considered a one-off year, right? And we didn't want to have this particular metric, that bar drop considerably for a shortened period of time, knowing that, the long-term impact of looking at density is really what resources are needed. And just a 1 year shift wouldn't necessarily shift the amount of resources needed to maintain that space if in the next year that building was repopulated. Many of the colleges and universities we work with have repopulated buildings and have a similar remote or online learning as has been seen in the past, pre-2020, pre-pandemic. That is not necessarily the case for the UMaine system. And that's why we're doing a reassessment moving forward, the impact of those distant learning credit hours.
Thanks very much.
Any other questions before I move on? Great questions. So really looking at more closely the subset of space that is over 50, you can see the growth over time during the course of our analysis. This really highlights that space will continue to age. And by fiscal year 27, 60% of the UMaine building inventory will be over 50 years old. In comparison to the Gordian Higher Ed public database average of 34% in fiscal year 22. And so the rate of growth has changed over time. This is really the facet of a large portion of your buildings being constructed at a similar time frame with that post-war modern era, and just shifting into the over 50 bucket. And so based off of the aging facilities and increasing backlog, again, just highlighting the question, what is the future space management program within the UMaine system? And so the next section, we're really going to highlight capital impacts, despite the escalating construction costs being felt across the country. So this is a really important trend to look at total capital investment over time. So this chart is looking at capital spend across the system, broken down between existing space, new space, and non-facilities. And so just given some of the conversations earlier, fiscal year 22 saw an increase in total investment from fiscal year 21. 70% of this investment went towards new space. So Portland Commons at USM, the engineering building at UMaine, just really big keynote buildings coming online soon, with expenditures being had in fiscal year 20. And these are great additions to each of these campuses. I read articles about Portland Commons being a passive house and really just hitting that growing trend in the Northeast in particular for sustainability standards. So those are really good additions to your campuses. On average, $49.2 million has been invested across or per year across the UMaine system. And in fiscal year 20, just highlighting that amount was $118.4 million. So record levels of investment going into the campuses across the UMaine system.
Emily, I assume that the existing space investment does not include demolition?
No, that would fall into the non-facilities. So any kind of non-asset enhancing project cost would fall into the purple area here of non-facilities.
So that means, so demolition costs are reflected on this chart?
Correct, in the purple area.
Okay, thanks.
And so looking specifically at existing space, that's what's going to decrease the overall need of your buildings, the investment going to enhance existing buildings. And so despite a substantial amount of investment into new space in fiscal year 22, we also are showing an increase in existing space investment for fiscal year 22. So again, kudos to the capital planning folks across the system. Comparing those existing space dollars against peers on a dollar per square foot basis, it's less than the higher ed public average. And you can see that blue line, UMaine has been more consistent over time. There was a drop in the higher ed average fiscal year 19 to 21, but they've rebounded. UMaine has also rebounded, but the higher ed public average was starting at a higher point with those expenditures. And so really the focus is what's the right amount. So how does this investment compare to what should be invested based off of the physical characteristics of each of the UMaine campuses? And so buildings and their components are predictable in nature. And so based off of this, we can really map out what it takes to keep up with them as systems are coming due for replacement. And so this slide is really meant to identify the target investment level for UMaine based off of the physical characteristics included in all the buildings. So if you're able to invest at or above the investment target line, that dotted blue line, over time, that's the level of investment that will keep up with the needs of its buildings and really prevent the accumulation of deferred maintenance. This is a budgeting model. So in some years, the actual needs will be lower, but in some years they'll be higher, but being able to invest at or above this line, this amount consistently is really the strategic starting point for evaluating the needed funding for your spaces. So the life cycle need, that top purple line, is the starting point for quantifying the annual investment target. It looks at function, technical complexity, age, and the size of all the buildings across the system, and really represents the amount you'd want to spend annually if you were to replace all of the building components the year they were coming due based off of typical life cycles. This is going to be more specific to each of the attributes of your campus, but still likely represents a level that is greater than necessary. So it's common to intentionally defer life cycle replacements to get more years of life out of a building component. And it's also a strategic move to, if a renovation is planned, to take care of multiple components at once rather than addressing them individually. This can also be a higher amount due to strong planned maintenance programs that will ultimately extend the life cycles needed at replacement time. And so to account for the strategies such as intentional deferral and good maintenance programs, like I just mentioned, we discount that life cycle need to the annual target. And so again, that's the recommended level to invest at annually in order to really prevent the deferral of need and growth of backlog over time. And so keeping up fully with everything would require $77.4 million to get that life cycle target at the purple dotted line. But we're really looking at the blue line, the annual target, which is $48.1 million. And so again, investing at this would mean limited deferral of maintenance needs and a consistent net asset value over time. And so there is a gap for the UMaine system, $28.1 million in fiscal year 22. And so we would call this unintentional deferral, ultimately leading to a growth in the backlog. And projecting this forward, Sightlines recommends 60 to 70 million to really keep campuses at that steady state. Again, do not want to diminish the achievements that have been had over time. We just talked about the highest level of philanthropy, increasing the space removal spend through those demolitions. And we all know that's really expensive and hard to accomplish. And so again, making strides in the right direction, and you should feel proud of this momentum. And, with the escalating construction costs, this momentum is more and more challenging to realize over time. And so again, just projecting forward, there are escalating construction costs that are mainly seen on the labor side at this point, and they're just expected to continue into the foreseeable future. We use the construction cost index that's released every January. It was 16.2% in 22, and the most current edition that just came out this past January is still 15.1%. That is a 30-city average across the country, but even within the state of Maine, we're seeing a range of 8 to 11% of inflation within construction costs specifically. And so this slide really highlights the needed investments over the next 10 years, broken down between what's current need or deferred maintenance, as well as what's coming due over the next 10 years. And so I would really ask you to focus on that yellow bar, the 462 million of current need. And these are really in those older buildings on campus, so over 50. And so continuing to target spaces that can come offline will ultimately decrease this need. And for those buildings that are planned to stay in the inventory, how can we plan for the future, knowing the life cycles that are past due or coming due in these spaces? And for comparison, this is really looking at what's been spent over the last 10 years. So 10 years of need coming due versus 10 years of historical investment. And so you've already achieved some progress in this area, and it's really just bridging the gap. What additional funding can meet ultimately the 862 million of needs coming due, or how can we decrease that needed bar by removing buildings from the inventory? And so, mapping this over time, you can see, I mentioned 70 or 60 to 70 million dollars of need to keep campus status quo. If you really want to draw down on the backlog, you can see that mapping that over time is closer to $100 million year over year. Another strategy is really to think about what's coming due in the next 10 years by type of need. So this is looking at percent of spend on the left-hand side going towards envelope systems, mechanical systems, and interiors. And then the pie chart on the right is mapping out what's coming due over the next 10 years. Again, highlighting that lighter shade of blue in the mechanical, a larger portion is coming due than what has been invested in previously. And so shifting your spending profile will help address this more priority need over the next 10 years.
Emily, the chart on the left-hand side, is that in actual dollars incurred, historical dollars, not adjusted for inflation?
Correct.
So the two numbers are not strictly comparable in terms of achieved need?
Yes, you would have to adjust, right, the left-hand side would increase over time. So all that translates into the NAV or net asset value. This is really a tool that we use to enable or assess overall fiscal health. And so this is calculated to correspond with a risk or level of investment here. So you can say the UMaine system is 51.6% for fiscal year 22. And so you're right on the brink of that systemic renovation stage. And it's where, there's failures that aren't necessarily expected, or they are expected, but you haven't been able to secure the resources to take care of that need before a failure exists. And, on the flip side, I've been talking to a lot of schools, and we look at this as percent good, 51.6% good. And they've been flipping it in terms of the opposite. What's the critical need on campus to really make the case for additional resources? In the end, as the backlog grows, the overall NAV will decrease. And this is a system-wide calculation, and not all campuses or buildings for that matter are created equal. we did want to highlight a couple case studies because progress, it's hard to sometimes see within our metrics at the system level. Here, this is looking at UMF's campus projected NAV over the next 2 years based off of the ESCO project and work that's being done. And so you can just see that dramatic jump from fiscal year 22 to fiscal year 24 based off of strategic replacements of essentially HVAC systems for the majority of their buildings. And so that's going to be extremely impactful for their overall fiscal health based off of their building needs. Another highlight here is really the engineering building. UMaine is a larger campus, so the impact is slightly smaller, but we are seeing a projected increase in the NAV from 48% to 51% with that building coming online. And then similarly, Fort Kent was able to increase their percent of space under 10 years old with the building and the Enrollment Advancement Center coming online this past year. And NAV has been stable based off of that building coming online too. So we're not seeing a decrease in the overall fiscal health of their building inventory. And so just to wrap things up here, this is a challenging situation for the UMaine system as well as other colleges and universities, but you have made progress in slowing the rate of change in some of these metrics. And really just understanding $60 to $70 million each year will really help address the aging process and mitigate the increased increased deferral to the backlog of needs. In addition, just highlighting again the growth in backlog as well as the decrease in the college going demographic really just makes the idea of space reduction more and more advantageous to the system. And if not that, just again, the idea of a strong space management program to understand what changes need to take place in the future. And so the pandemic has really given a lot of campuses the ability to step back and reassess what needs to be available on both services, academics, as well as physical space at their campuses. So really helping define which, what's really good at each of the UMaine campuses and help that define the mission and ultimately drive space decisions will be important moving forward. And with that, I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Emily, for such a well-organized presentation. Could you take down the, yeah, great, thank you. Questions or comments about this presentation? So, I mean, again, could you comment a little bit on this? I mean, the challenge, if we have money to invest or if we decide to invest money, it's the only way to get this down is to renovate or demolish, right? Am I missing something?
Right. So I think it's assessing the space needed on each of your campuses based off of what those campuses are trying to achieve. But yes, either significant investment to draw down on some of the need or the removal of buildings will ultimately shift the metrics in the direction that I think you're hoping to move in. I don't think the idea of shifting online or to remote is not necessarily a problem. It's really an opportunity to continue to increase revenue. But the challenge is on the flip side, how does that impact the space needed at each of the campuses? And I think questions to date have been, or comments to date have been, if workforces are shifting remote, then how can we use the idea of hoteling, of space, et cetera, to remove space? And I think it's just not been achieved in a way that ultimately can lead to space reductions. And it's really understanding the pedagogy of each of the campuses. And, if there are courses that can be taught online and will continue to be taught online, are there physical spaces that used to hold those courses? Can those be shifted in terms of the programs being taught within those spaces, or ultimately can some buildings come offline? And so it's not an easy discussion. I think it was brought up a couple conversations ago within the UMaine system. What are other schools doing? And we have seen consolidating campuses, but they're relatively new. So I don't know if we have the data to show direct impact of progress being made within some of these metrics just yet. Some administrative services have changed. And I think, the first decision is, in principle, where do we want to go? And then the space decisions are really secondary as it aligns with the other decisions being made.
Yeah, and you did mention reuse of the buildings or perhaps sale or rental of the buildings to even outside entities as a way of reducing.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily, it's a use of resources, right? So how can you shift the resources needed for a space in whatever means?
Yeah. Chair Riley.
I think, Ryan, did you need to get in? Would you, should I yield to you?
I was only going to say, I think at some point it may be worth the committee, the FFT committee in this case, having another conversation about what those goals are. It's been a long time since Trustee Turner was leading the committee, and Trustee Fournier and Chip Gavin and myself led this subcommittee that worked on some interim goals with Emily back in the day and others. And one of the big focuses of the board at that time, a key focus, was around this space reduction. So every single proposal that came forward, even if it was just expanding space by a small amount, had to have an offset. And we've shifted away from that a little bit over the last several years, I think appropriately, as we have emphasized research a little bit more. And so we don't always offset, the engineering building came up. We didn't ask for an offset of that. So some of the priorities have shifted a little bit over the years, and it may be worth just going back and looking at what those goals are and whether they make sense today.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, it's striking that it seems to me this speaks to the need for a system-wide capital plan, so that we think, you look at some of the plans, the age of UMaine is dragging down the system-wide NAV. So is that a place to invest? It just really raises a lot of questions, and as does, I think, the finding that a lot of this is mechanical upgrades that are, not even what we normally, I think about when we think about old buildings. But the question I had, Emily, my favorite chart wasn't there. I love the appendix that lists by the buildings at risk by campus, because I think that gives us as FFT some guidance about where the priorities are about the age of buildings and their need. Is that something that is available this year?
It is available. I think, the pandemic, as I'm asking you all to reassess the position of each of the campuses, Gordian is reassessing how we've gone about some of our analytics in the past. And I think that particular analysis that we've done for the UMaine system in the past should be looked at. We have always done that looking at NAV, or the net asset value that we just went over, as a judgment of condition. And then there was kind of more colloquial conversations around utilization. And I'm not sure the analysis in and of itself provides the direction that you want to be directed in. And I think, to Ryan's point, maybe looking at the KPIs as a fuller team and committee, and see what change potentially needs to happen in some of those. Are those the right KPIs? Are the goals the right goals at this point in time, given everything that's changed in the world? Can really help us maybe reimagine that particular analysis in terms of the definition and what metric we want to use for condition, but particularly on the utilization side. What is the right utilization for your buildings? Is that shift by campus, et cetera, in terms of, again, the missions that each of the campuses want to achieve?
But didn't the appendix I'm thinking of just had age of building and risk level, didn't it? Wasn't by sort of, you identified them as things that could be repaired, things that couldn't be,
Right. So I think we took the building inventory for each of our campuses and categorized as what potential buildings were candidates for renovation versus what should be removed. Correct. And one of the facets of that was utilization and condition. And so again, we can certainly provide the information we have this year. It is available, but I think again, similar to the density reworking, that might be something we want to continue to rework in the future to be more impactful for decision making.
It is an interesting indicator. I remember, it's the place where we saw dormitories really surface. But thanks.
Yeah, if we could, that would be really helpful if we could. I'd forgotten about that appendix, and it is useful, I think. Emily.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the great presentation. I think it's the third or fourth time I've seen this, and every time my brain stretches a lot. It's a lot to take in, and it's such an interesting metric. One of the things I don't remember is how do you account for the fact that not all space is created equal and not all space is created for the same purpose, right? So you can't use a classroom for a dormitory. You can't. So if you take a dormitory offline, or if you add a classroom, you can't offset it necessarily with something that wasn't the similar purpose, right? Or to our earlier conversation about specific natures of arts facilities or research facilities. Can you just remind me how the formula and analysis takes into account that not all space is interchangeable from an online offline perspective?
Right. It doesn't really get into that much detail. It's really a 30,000 foot view analysis. What we can do, and this would be done probably by campus, is a building portfolio analysis. So the leadership teams at each of the campuses would define portfolios across their buildings, and it's utilized to really be a parameter of what we're going to say no to, right? So the leadership sets, this is the focus of the institution, and based off of that, these buildings are more likely to have yeses when it comes to capital decisions versus these buildings not. There would be a category considered transitional, right? And that's where we would not have funding moving forward versus others. And it can be done by functional, it can be done by location of campus. I worked with a school that was really trying to drive a recruitment efforts. And so they had a first year portfolio. So any building that a first year student would be in, they would increase the investment to that space to ultimately prove the individual building NAV. They would just show well. And so kind of the idea of portfolios could kind of hit on your point a little bit.
That's helpful. And I think it's just an important reminder, because I think this report is very impactful from a big picture perspective, but it is a reminder that we have to look at the details too, that it's not just a simple swapping out of space. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Emily. And we're going to have Barbara and then Clyde, and then we're going to move on the agenda. Barbara?
I think I would urge this committee to focus on what you think the strategic plan should contain that would drive this discussion and result in more specific plans and use of this data. And I don't know if the capital plan idea made it into the first draft, but I'd certainly encourage it to be in the strategic plan. And the development of the proper metrics to measure what we want to accomplish in this type of analysis is got to be something that this committee would be the most appropriate place to identify for the ongoing development of that plan. Thanks.
Thank you. Clyde?
Emily, I had a question. Several of the campuses have been experiencing declining enrollments as a result of demographic changes. And those are probably not likely to stabilize for probably about the next 3 or 4 years. But has any work been done to kind of work out what the optimal space would be for those campuses that have got the declining enrollments? Because I would think that there's not a lot of short-term benefits for those campuses to reduce space. It costs money to reduce space. Has anything like that been done, kind of planning forward like 3 years? Like what should the space be? Because that will take a lot of time and work, and I suspect that campuses don't have that time.
Sure. I don't know if work to date has really been done in that. I know, as you mentioned, the removal of buildings does cost money, and sometimes it costs a lot of money. The UMass system has taken several buildings offline and they just remain but not being utilized. But again, it's that portfolio idea where those buildings are in the transitional portfolio and no investment is being had unless, a catastrophic emergency and they need to invest in those spaces. So it's that, resources are not flowing towards those spaces because those spaces are not needed. I think, based off of all of the data and the conversations we've had, the decreasing demographic is going to extend more than 3 or 4 years. And so that trend isn't likely to reverse anytime soon. And so I don't think it's a short-term challenge. I think it's a longer-term challenge that, again, defining each of the campuses in a way that can ultimately drive space decisions will be important moving forward. I think, assess the space that is needed and then reimagine campuses to fit that need versus thinking, what do we do with what we have, right? Think of where you want to be and then work backwards would be my suggestion. But I do think it's a longer term challenge that many campuses will have to address strategically and decisively moving forward.
Thank you. Emily Kane, you still have your hand up. Do you have another question?
I sure don't. I just haven't taken my hand down. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I see no other hands up. So Emily Morris, thank you very, very much for that presentation. You've obviously got us thinking, and this will, I think, particularly with what Trustee Riley said and Trustee Kane, is going to command more of our attention going ahead. Carolyn, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Thank you, Chair Case. No, I just raised it. Sorry about my lateness here, but I just wanted to add that the Gordian analysis for the campuses is, as Emily said, at a very high level. And although we try to dig down into the building by building level, that takes a lot of resources that we aren't currently expending. So we do know and hope are working on with UMaine in particular, but also hope to work with all the campuses on getting some additional space use and facility condition analyses done so that we can make more informed decisions across the board.
Thanks, Carolyn.
You're welcome.
All right, seeing no further comment on this issue, we'll move on then. We have a little bit of time to make up for the balance of the morning here. The next agenda item is a discussion of the congressionally directed spending planned capital projects. And Vice Chancellor Farini Money is going to lead that discussion, I believe.
Thank you, Trustee Cates. I'll get started, and Ryan Lowe and Sam Warren are with me as well to help with questions and to discuss this. It's a good follow-on to the last discussion because it has some positive news about the future relative to our facilities. Some of you have seen some of these slides before, so we'll go through those quickly. But what we're focusing on today are the congressionally directed spending projects that involve capital initiatives. And so we are focusing there with previews really of what the FFT will be seeing in the coming months from each of these. We can go to the next slide, Sam. And I'm going to actually turn to Sam to cover this slide. She has done the bulk of the work on this frontline activity for the CDS activity, and she can tell you a little bit about where we are with 23.
Thanks, Vice Chancellor Farini Mundy. So as you can see here, and as you've hopefully seen in the press and in various university announcements, we were incredibly fortunate to receive a little over $53 million in congressionally directed spending. We use the term earmark because it's congressionally directed spending in the Senate and community project funding in the House, and that gets a little wordy. So earmark is a term we all recognize, but we were really fortunate that Senator Collins and Senator King, as well as Representative Golden, directly secured this amount of funding for us with, of course, the support of Representative Pingree, who's an appropriator. What's really interesting, and some of you know this, but while the process on the front end is very atypical from most federal funding, merit-based review, et cetera. Once Congress passes the budget and the president signs it with these earmarks included, information gets transmitted to the various federal agencies about the projects. And from there on, they're really administered like a federal grant award. So we have to submit an application, and we have to have, subject to various federal reporting and all of the typical kind of administrative aspects, which is incredibly intensive, and real kudos, especially to the research administration team at UMaine, who has taken on the work of administering what is, according to Inside Higher Ed, the greatest number of earmark projects for any institution of higher education in the country. The terms and conditions vary by agency, but we generally expect to have funds in hand for the FY23 process by September of this year, the end of the federal fiscal year. Though I will say we still have not received funding in some cases for earmarks in FY22, but we think the agencies are getting more up to speed and have their internal infrastructure and process in place to administer these in a more timely way. They've all been fantastic to work with and very patient. The biggest thing that we try to stress to campuses is that although there has literally been an act of Congress to say this project is approved and expected, all of the university policies and procedures still apply. So just because Congress has said they expect you, to construct this facility or expand this program, doesn't mean you still don't need approval from the campus and the system, and of course this Board of Trustees where appropriate. We just wanted to.
Sam?
Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt here briefly.
Yeah.
To say that we're focused here on congressionally directed spending, the earmarks process that Sam has described and that we've talked to you about in the past. I remind everyone that there is a parallel and in some sense interconnected process of congressionally directed appropriation that has happened at the University of Maine for many years with our external consultants based in Washington who do government relations with us for that purpose. And that happened when there were no earmarks, and now again when there are earmarks. And we are not bringing to you at this time what's coming out of that process in 23, but of course anything that involves capital improvement will come to you. So that's where our consultants in Washington work directly with the agencies and with the delegation to ensure that there are congressional opportunities in agency budgets. It's a little bit different from this, but we're working to kind of at least, if not merge the processes, make sure that they're highly complementary. And then Sam will say more about this list and the next. You've seen these before, so we don't really want to spend the bulk of our time here. But the system has done so very well through our terrific delegation. And I wanted to point out the range of agencies and accounts that are involved for us. So what we have are all of our campuses now engaging with program staff at these agencies, some of which the campuses have experience with, some of which they do not. And that's why we're very glad that the UMaine Research Administration folks can be in on this, because we have to be very careful about grants, terms and conditions and so forth. Sam, anything more on these two slides? It's a great list.
Yeah, one of the things we would just highlight, which speaks to the complexity of administering some of these projects, which is a wonderful problem to have. But you see these first two projects here listed, both of them at the University of Maine, but with statewide and frankly, national and beyond implications, is that the delegation was so committed to getting the maximum amount of funding they could for these projects that in the case of this tick-borne disease prevention project, it is actually being funded through 3 different federal agencies. And so the delegation works very aggressively to kind of piece together these funding sources, but it speaks to the complexity of the projects because ultimately these will be 3 different awards and 3 different kind of administrative processes. And similarly with the PFAS Research Center, there is both a NIST and an interior component. So really appreciative of the delegation for kind of figuring out the fit for these projects and maximizing the opportunity for us to do good for Maine. And again, kudos to the research administration folks, especially at UMaine, who are committed to navigating this. You'll see this second list of projects. And again, as the Vice Chancellor pointed out, just an incredible diversity of accounts that we were fortunate to be funded through.
And so as we go to the next slide, and we're always happy to go back and answer more specifics, I'm actually going to ask Vice Chancellor Loh to speak for a moment, because it's been very clear from the beginning in our thinking that, of course, these are capital projects, which means that they follow through with all of our proper board procedures and timelines. And we'll quickly run through those that you can expect to see. But Ryan, I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to reinforce here.
Yeah, only just to echo that point that, lots of people doing lots of really great work. And we're constantly reminding folks about the process. And as you know, from the beginning of our agenda today, we always have these tight construction windows, but we're absolutely committed to the traditional process that these projects would flow through. And so we are constantly emphasizing and reminding folks of deadlines for both for FFT and the board, and making sure that all of those sync up.
And so these are coming, and so we'll run quickly through them. I think as we present these, as they actually come to FFT and to the BOT, one thing we might ask the teams to include would be a very brief history of what's already come before you, so that that's handy and present as you see what's coming next in any of these, because some of these have been to you either as information items or in other forms. So the Green Engineering and Materials, the GEM facility, the laboratory, which will be the extension of the Advanced Structures and Composites Center, allowing for broader and far more modern, even more modern than what we have, 3D printing that has come to you as information. And so we expect to bring that to you in the fall with the hope of groundbreaking for the spring of 24. And we'll be happy at that time to talk to you about how the funding comes together. I'm not going to go through each of these in detail, just to kind of signal that they're coming. So the University of Maine PFAS Research Center getting terrific attention and publicity because of the relevance of this problem in the state of Maine. And this will involve, as you see, some renovations and equipment to be able to work with colleagues across the state to actually do testing here at UMaine. Industry 4.0, this is advanced additive manufacturing. So it will work with UMaine's Advanced Manufacturing Center building. Again, that facility does a terrific amount of partnering with companies across the state to do development work and test proof of concept kinds of work to help them prepare materials and create manufacturing opportunities going forward. There will be more coming to you on that. The next one is about access to care and patient outcomes across Maine. Sam, you can summarize this one perhaps better than I can.
Yeah, this is a wonderful project. As we know, a limitation to our ability to produce the healthcare workforce, specifically nursing, that the state needs is inadequate clinical opportunities. And so this is going to allow us to expand nursing simulation opportunities across the system, which will in turn allow us to train more nurses and train them in a way that's consistent across the system. So this is a great example of collaboration where all of the nursing programs across the system have worked together on this request. And one of the things they hope to do is standardize simulation experiences across the system so that a student at Fort Kent and a student at Portland in the nursing programs would have a similar experience And they are hopeful that this will improve the quality of the preparation and improve patient outcomes. And it's just a wonderful example of that collaboration. There was also a nursing simulation project in FY22 that was also inclusive of all of the nursing programs in the system, and that was led by UMaine. And so this time it was agreed by the nursing program leaders that UMA will take the lead. And I think we'll see further nursing simulation related requests move forward in FY24 as well. So a great example of what we can do together.
The next at UMFK, the Fox Auditorium renovation, very pleased that that one is coming in the direction of the system, and you can see the kinds of renovations. Again, we hope to bring that to FFT in fall 23. Just moving quickly through them, knowing we're mindful of time here. This is about the SAWIC project that is about recirculating aquaculture systems, part of UMaine's Cooperative Aquaculture Research Center. And we will likely not be at a level that will require a board review, but I want you to stay abreast of this good work that will again make a difference for Maine. Wild blueberries, same kind of impact, and this is some construction of a new barn. So more to come on this, so that we're able to continue that work. This Food Innovation Center will have some space renovations. Again, something very critical in the state of Maine for us to be able to provide this capacity. So we're pleased with that. They'll come to you in the summer of 24. Dental workforce development. This is at UMPI, and I don't know if President Rice is here, nor did I give him any warning, but Sam, say a word or two more about this, perhaps.
I don't know if President Rice is going to jump in. This is another example of a collaborative project. The proposal here is for UMA to expand its dental programs, which are currently offered at Lewiston Auburn College and also at the Bangor UMA campus, and to expand those programs to the University of Maine at Presque Isle through a partnership between those two universities. And the hope is that there would also be a community clinic where our dental students would be getting hands-on workforce preparation, and in turn providing free or sliding scale dental care to the community. So really an example of a win-win for the campus and community, which is why the delegation and the system so strongly supported this project.
And then just wrapping up, the sawing operations training facility. Thank you to Representative Golden. That involves a new building at UMaine. That'll come to you in the summer. And the Cohen Institute, Public Service Education Partnership with Department of Ed funding. We've spoken about Boudreaux Hall already this morning. Some additional renovations will be possible there, and that comes under your threshold, but we'll keep you posted. So just in conclusion, because I know time is tight, this is a process now that we feel is kind of working with a rhythm, now that we have a bit of a trend and we know how to do this. This year, what we did through my office was to lead an internal solicitation process back in the fall to ask the campuses to put forward their ideas, whether they would be good fits for the earmark process, or perhaps the appropriations spending, or other kinds of potential funding sources. Several of us on this call have just finished reviewing all of those submissions in preparation for pulling out those that look like the best fits for earmarks, where we have the most capacity and the best ideas in terms of what we know the delegation is willing to put forward. So that process is in the works right now. I believe the number is bigger than 50 at this point, Sam. It grew. We gave a soft deadline in the fall, and people kept coming up with more ideas. That was great. How many did we have in the end? 58 or something?
Yeah, I think we had about 58 projects totaling about $320 million worth of requests.
I see President Zekas there. He read them, and so did others. So a wonderful array, a portfolio of ideas for us. And you can see the way that we're prioritizing. But what we've added in a bit more intentionally this year is that if a project either doesn't look like a good earmark fit or doesn't make it, we will be standing ready then through the Office of Research Development here at UMaine to try to help direct that project toward other potential funding, so that we don't lose these good ideas and that we find other ways to bring them in. And the due date is coming right up. So we're all busy with this. special
One of-
thanks to Sam for the great.
Yeah,
work.
one of the things I was just going to add for this committee's interest is that we have been much more intentional this year in including capital planning and facilities management, as well as the CBOs in the review of these projects. One of the things we found in this inflationary environment is that when we submit a project and when it's ultimately funded, a year plus later, that costs have escalated. And we've also found that the federal agencies have requirements, for example, about using American steel and other products. So we're making sure that the projects are consistent with the campus master plans, and that the budgets that we're putting forth to the delegation are reasonable and take into account things like cost increases where appropriate, indirect that we're able to recover, et cetera. So thanks to Carolyn McDonough and her team, as well as the facilities, the folks across the system and the CBOs. That's a great improvement to our process this year.
So we can take your questions now.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Questions by members of the board? Samantha, right at the beginning, you said something about how well we did as a state, and I'm not sure I heard you correctly. Could you repeat that?
Yes, so
something about being the first in the nation, or that?
Yeah, so according to an analysis by Inside Higher Education, we have two distinctions. We are the institution of higher education that secured the greatest number of earmarks in the FY23 process. And again, that's a reflection of the leadership of our delegation and their partnership with us, as well as the incredible projects that were brought forth and the diversity of those projects. And then I'll give a shout out to Dean Softly. We also had the smallest earmark in the nation, which was $17,000 for equipment to support our wonderful student attorneys provide legal aid in the field to new Mainers. So congratulations to Lee on that wonderful distinction. I know we usually talk about bigger numbers for her here, so we'll point that out.
Well, congratulations, Dean Softly. Other questions about that presentation, what we've just heard? I'm not seeing.
It's all very exciting. That's all I would say. It's an exciting accomplishment, and it's a ton of work. And every one of those things takes a lot of work and conversations and a lot of people, faculty, staff, time. So thank you. It's really exciting.
Yeah, very much so. Well, thank you then. We will move on to the next agenda item, which is at tab 8, which is the UMS Transforms update from Vice Chancellor Farini Mundy. Welcome back.
Thank you. Great to be here again. Very exciting to give this update, which my colleague Grace Garland is sharing right now. Grace is the project director for the UMS Transforms effort. And once we go to slide show view, Grace will be good. If we can, okay. So what we were asked to do here was to focus on the match, but in order to do that, it seems appropriate to first give a little bit of a recap of this very exciting project. So we go to the next slide. Just a reminder, it's an historic investment, and the discussions began rather sort of formally in October of 2019, but we have had years of support from the Harold Alfond Foundation here in the system, here at the University of Maine. And so this is a continuation and a next level of our engagement. And then the awards were made in July of 20 for the University of Maine Athletics Award, and then in August for the full-blown system award. And this announcement was made in October of 2020 with a focus on the fact that this is Maine's largest investment of this kind, and it's a 10 to 12 year investment. And then of course we had a pandemic. So we're updating now on where we are with this. The challenge is to raise a $170 million match to this $240 million. So we'll talk about how that works going forward. Next slide, please, Grace. And just a reminder, there are 4 initiatives within the project. The Maine College of Engineering and Computing, which is a $75 million award. And you see what the match requirements are here across the way, the Maine Graduate and Professional Center, Student Success and Retention Initiatives, and Black Bear Athletics. The first three of these areas are system-wide foci, where we, over the 10 to 12 years of the project, will have ways in which all campuses who wish to be engaged can be. I would say that student success and retention is very far along in engaging all campuses in the system, following pilot work done here at UMaine and UMaine-Machias. But these matches are substantial, and so we'll talk more about that. Next slide, please. As you heard from Jeff Mills earlier, we have a rather innovative portfolio approach to the match that has been agreed to by the Alfond Foundation, where match can come from 4 separate streams or 4 separate sources. And the match or the leveraging is the funding that we need to come up with as a system in order to meet the conditions of these awards. And what's interesting about this is that the philanthropy category, not surprising, we're very accustomed to match that needs to come from our philanthropy leaders, Jeff Ainsley and others. And you see the kinds of dollars that typically come in there, and those are listed under philanthropy. But we also have agreement with the Alfonds that the match could come from corporate partners or other kinds of foundations that maybe aren't areas where we've had substantial dollars coming in over the years. And so you see the types of activities that could lead to match within that category: corporate gifts, sponsorships, other kinds of arrangements with the corporate sector. And you also heard Jeff mention that here at the University of Maine, we have added a director of corporate partnerships who is already engaging us with a number of CEOs across the state to be sure that we have those interconnections. And we're very grateful to anybody who helps us with this match. All of these organizations, everyone working on this, because what this does is it essentially doubles the impact potential of a major project that we have to begin with. Federal funding is also allowable now with us on this as match, and we are doing very well, especially well in that category with these types of projects that you see here, including some of the congressionally directed spending that we just talked about. And then state funding that comes to us, particular appropriations, the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan, the $35 million that came to the system, was constructed in a way that has a very strong focus on workforce development, which is a part of the student success part of Alfond and MEIF. So right now, what we're working at is to try to have this matrix be familiar to everybody who's working on this project, and to work across the system, and in particular with the UMaine and USM foundations, to look at how this all plays out and how we think about targets within each of these areas across the 4 pieces of the project. We have preliminary numbers now that are being vetted at this point and will be reported officially in the coming weeks, that we are over 80 million in the match. But all of that requires continued checking and more fine-grained detail. So next slide, please, Grace. And here's just a little more detail about what these 2 categories are. I think I've already spoken to this. I would highlight major national foundations. We as a system have some history of funding there. We have a current grant from the Mellon Foundation at UMaine Augusta. But in general, at least at UMaine, we've not been as intentional as we need to be about the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation, about the Gates Foundation, and so many others. So that's a part of where we are focusing right now. Next slide, please. And this is about the other buckets. I spoke to this already, but you see a bit more detail here as we try to look at how all of these pieces can fit together to further the 4 major initiatives of the Alfond project, which in many ways, perhaps if you take the athletics and put that aside, but the other 3 pretty well span a significant amount of important work that goes on across our entire system. So we're able to connect that activity to overall goals for the whole system. Next slide, please. We see some strong numbers coming in around engineering and computing, innovation and technology, coming listed here from Defense, NIST, more defense, more NIST, and then main jobs and recovery. Much of this tied to GEM and the great interest that that is attracting at the federal level. And one thing that I'm very proud about with GEM, as we've been doing planning and bringing people together with our new dean and with Dr. Habib Dagher as well, we've been able to conceptualize GEM as both an instructional and research facility at the same time, with the concept of a teaching hospital sort of guiding how we go at that. Next slide, please. And we have to be very in strong partnership with our Alphon funders about what counts as match. There has to be a direct link with part of the budgeted activity of the project, or there has to be a new direction that will clearly enhance the impact of what we've promised to do in Transforms. It can increase resources for programs that are already developing. I would offer the research learning experiences as one. That's a part of Transforms, very clearly defined. And we've had some external funders say they'd like to add on to what we have there to make it possible to expand that and be aligned with the strategic vision of Transform. So all of that's in our minds as we work with the funder to think about this match. But what's exciting about the match and the overall project is the potential to, well, transform, I guess that's the word that we're using here, many, many dimensions of what we do here in the system, and that's already beginning to happen. So with that, is the next slide questions, maybe? Grace, it's the end. Okay, so happy to take your questions.
I apologize, I was on mute. Questions from the group or comments? Well, thank you very much. Oh, excuse me. Pat Flood, yes.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but I did want to say, I've seen an iteration of this several times from the president or from some other folks, and you may feel like you're overdoing it, but you're not. Not for me as a board member. I learn something every time, and it's so important to what we're doing. You can't repeat this too many times for me. I just wanted to make sure I learn something every time you do this. So thank you.
Appreciate that, trustee. We love to talk about it.
And I don't think we mention every meeting, but perhaps we should, and so that the word gets back to the Harold Alphon Foundation from the Board of Trustees about how much we are deeply appreciative of this investment in this system. And I seem to recall this was the largest private gift ever made to a public university in New England, or at least a state institution in New England. Is that right?
It was, at the time it was made, it was the 8th largest gift to any university system in history. It has been surpassed one or two times since. I just want to put this in perspective. When I got here, if you take the athletic portion out of the equation, we were talking about getting somewhere between $10 and $40 million of additional dollars. We ultimately made a decision to go to the Alphons with a $500 million request, which translated into the total of the $240 million when everything was said and done. And I think Joan and Ryan and I will be called upon to give an update while we're down there discussing other items, but an update on these expenditures and how they're having an impact on the university. I also want to make one other point. If you go back to the Guardian document and then realize that we are being very conscious about going for additional dollars for our infrastructure challenge. When I got here, I was asked by the board to address 50 years of underinvestment in infrastructure. And what we have done, and because of the work of people like Sam and Joan and Ryan and others, and trustees as well, I want to be very clear, we have found different ways to fund the catch-up that we have to play over the next 10 years with respect to infrastructure. These are important investments. And again, as you heard from the head of the foundation at the University of Maine and from Joan, our ability to have negotiated different matching sources that had never been allowed before in grants by the Alphons was an important step in maximizing the benefit of these dollars and moving them to expenditure in a more rapid way.
Thanks, Chancellor. Any other questions or comments on this agenda item? Seeing none, we will then move on to the next item, which is tab 9. Review of information technology projects with a value of $250,000 or greater. Our regular report from David Demers, CIO. David?
Thank you, Chair Cates. Hopefully the slides are coming up. So I'm going to focus on one major project in particular, and commendation to you, Chair Cates. I don't know how you do it, but you get us back on track in time. So I don't feel like I have to rush through this, but we should have ample time at the end to cover any questions. So as you are aware, we do have a major initiative underway that we are calling Repaving Main Street. This is a slide you've seen before. It sort of encapsulates what we are trying to do through this major system overhaul, not only of our student information system, but all of our administrative systems that are tied together to run all of our business processes and academic programming. So we are aiming to try to find some efficiencies, gain some usability, make the system more effective, and promote student success across the board. Part of that is by eliminating as much overhead in our technical architecture as possible, moving systems to cloud-enabled solutions where and when possible, and really optimizing our student information system to respect and understand and reflect where we are with unified accreditation. So these are the key principles that we have guiding this particular project. We've earmarked, to use that word, I probably shouldn't after the last couple sessions, but $16.8 million to cover this particular initiative. This is to actually help us move our HR and our ERP systems into a cloud-enabled solution. We're breaking that out into 2 different phases, which I'll describe more in just a second. And then the third phase, or the third component of this, is overhauling our campus solutions environment. And campus solutions is our student information system. That one notably is not being sought to move to a software as a service or cloud-based platform, simply because there are no viable cloud-enabled student information systems available today. By the time we get to the end of this project, that may change. I'm not expecting that to be the case, however. So in terms of where we are, this is the timeline for our cloud project, and that includes moving our HR and our core administrative budget finance purchasing systems to the cloud. Right now, we are in toward the end of the first quarter 2023, where you will see phase 1 and phase 2 are occurring concurrently. We are marching toward the ability to start testing out the first phase, which is our HR environment, getting the first application build to actually have our functional offices go through, get their first sneak peek at what that platform is going to do for them and where we have some gaps to address. So this is slightly different from what was originally approved, and I think I mentioned this last time, and that we were looking to do the recruitment component of the HR environment as the first phase, then full HR. Those 2 have been collapsed into a single phase, which will help us be much more efficient with the resources that we have available. In terms of where we are on overall status, there are some yellows here. We do have some risks and some challenges as we are moving down this path, and nothing that we wouldn't probably have anticipated as we go into this. This is a huge undertaking, depending on a lot of pieces falling into the right order on the table. However, we do have some staffing resources, and some of this is related to turnover, some of it's related to health matters, just some challenges in making sure that the folks that we're depending upon to actually move some of these things forward are available and don't have other daytime jobs, which we know is not the case. So we're asking a lot of our functional offices, and we are doing our best to manage moving forward with the project with their availability to assist. Our current focus is on completing the final first phase of converting our HR data over into a cloud environment. And there are some decisions that have to be made in terms of making that happen. One of the things that we do know that we'll have to focus on is refining things like how we define an employee's location, things that are a little messy in our current HR system, and standardize and normalize those as we move over into the cloud space. So we are close to being able to finalize our first pass at the data conversion, which will enable us to get our first application build, to start testing and playing around with the system and get a first real feel of what that environment's going to look like for us in the future state. A couple things to convey to this group. We did have to push back our initial review of that HR environment to the week of March 20th. Our original plan had us kicking off that process right around this week, the first week in March. But again, due to some staffing challenges, some delays in data conversion, we've had to push that back by a couple of weeks. So we will, currently we're on track to hit that metric, but I wanted to convey to this team that that's one of the reasons why the schedule has been highlighted as a yellow item. In addition, with some turnover in the HR arena, we are lacking some champions, particularly for some modules that we were hoping to implement as part of this project. One of them is the performance management component of the HR system. So that's things like being able to do employee reviews, being able to actually have that automated, not automated, but at least tracked in the HR system as opposed to manually on spreadsheets as we do it today. We don't have the resources to be able to focus on how to build that platform out. So we have decided collectively with the steering committee to actually defer launch of the performance management component until after go live. So that one's being pulled off the table. That will help with the timeline a little bit. We also are still working with the University of Maine, the University of Maine Machias, as they are thinking through how their integration of those two campuses in the administrative systems is going to look and feel and operate so that we can actually start to code that and convert that data over as we bring it over into the ERP system, as well as inform what we're doing with the campus solutions overall. So there are some considerations there, and also make sure President Softly is aware that we are looking at ways to make sure that we can recognize Maine law as an independent business unit or institution within the system. And that's been a long requested item for us to focus on. So that will be a part of the repaving Main Street project. In terms of the identified risks on the cloud side of the fence, again, we have some staffing constraints that have gotten in the way of our being able to maintain momentum on our data conversion and integration strategies. Just to give the board a bit of a sense of the magnitude of the issue that we're talking about, we have several hundred different unique integrations. These are data flows that go between third-party systems and our core administrative systems. So each one of those needs to be reprogrammed, needs to be redesigned to take advantage of the data architecture available in the cloud space. And it's a lot to track and make sure that we're working forward and making sure that we have a viable approach to make this all successful. So that we need to be careful to not go too fast on some of these things because they need to be done right. And that is actually causing us to take a little bit slower pace with some of the things that we might have anticipated originally. But we are at the point where any further delays in our ability to convert and extract data out of our current systems will pose a potential risk to the targeted go live dates that I shared on the prior screen. So for phase one, we are still hoping we can hit the benchmark of going live with our HR system in January of 2024. And on the ERP side, we're still targeting July of 2024 as our go live date. Some other things that have come up, and these are things that we're working on and getting more comfort with understanding that there will be changes in how we do things just by nature of moving to a cloud system. It's not going to look like PeopleSoft. It's not going to behave like Main Street does today. And as functional offices are starting to understand that that's just an eventuality that we have to come to terms with, we are making progress on being able to have greater agreement on standardizing things such as approval workflows for position requisitions, We have some campuses that have several steps, up to a dozen steps along that process, and some that have 2 or 3. So figuring out a happy medium and compromising on what we can standardize on is going to help us greatly in terms of designing a system that's going to work for everyone as being as efficient as possible. So we're making progress on that. One piece that we still don't have a strong sense of how we're going to handle, we have 2 third-party systems that we rely heavily on for our purchasing and expense management side of the fence. So this is for the ERP system. Right now we use a tool called Jagger. We call it Marketplace in our internal system for purchase management. And then on the expense management side for travel and other cash management activities, we rely on a tool called Concur. So those are currently integrated with the Main Street environment. And there's the way that we do it is we send data back and forth pretty regularly between those to keep the budget in check and actually coordinated with what's happening on the general ledger side. So there's nothing out of the box that makes these things work with the Oracle Cloud products that we are moving to. So again, redesigning all of these, but also giving thought to how we can improve the integration and make data more accessible for folks that need and rely on the data coming through those systems. So we're still working with our implementation partner, DriveStream, on how to best integrate those particular tools and make sure that we wind up in a place that's going to be sustainable for us. And that's one of the key things that I'm very anxious about, is making sure that we don't try to over-engineer some of these solutions, because that just creates technical overhead that gets in the way of our being able to make modifications and deploy best practices where and when possible. In terms of the repaving Main Street project, for the Campus Solutions reimplementation side, we are still on track. We're still in our discovery phase, trying to gain as much information and understanding of what the pain points are on the student information side of the house, so that we can come up with the game plan for what the future state environment is going to look like. We've engaged, I think we're over 70 discovery sessions now, with multiple areas, multiple functional offices, including faculty and student groups, to gain an understanding of what they would like to see in a future state environment. Our implementation partner on this one has provided to our steering committee an academic structure foundation assumptions document, which basically just solidifies what are the foundational elements of our student information system that need to be in place for the future state. And that will help guide and direct us as we come up with the game plan and the roadmap for what Main Street's going to look like for our student and faculty populations as we go forward. One of the things that we recently decided is that we are going to go forward with a recently released version of People Tools. Not to get too technical, but People Tools is the component that sits between the front end that the students and faculty interact with and the back end database system. It's what ties all the database tables together and makes data flow to the front end. So PeopleSoft just recently released version 8.60 of People Tools. We don't have that in our production environment yet. However, we've decided that we're going to use this for our prototype environment because it will have some anticipated functionality that we think we're going to need that isn't available in the current version of People Tools that we are on. The other recent decision that was made and endorsed by our steering committee was that we were exploring how we might be able to better promote cross-institutional programming within the student information system. One notion that we were exploring was having an umbrella University of Maine system institution and have the campuses designated as a campus underneath that umbrella institution. And that would allow us to maybe have the opportunity to make data or course programming available across various buckets on the campuses. It was a good thought, but when we started to dig into it and understand that its impacts on financial aid, it impacts on students' ability to register and make sure that everything is in place, the recommendation from our implementation partner was to maintain the existing architecture, which is each campus is a unique institution and has a unique institution code in the student information system. That means that in order to promote and support cross-campus programming. We're going to have to really leverage some of the cross-listing components that we already have in place. We already know are working. They're a little more manual driven than we would like, so we will focus on optimizing those processes and make them as streamlined as possible. In terms of risks on the campus solution side, one of the key things is making sure folks really understand what the scope of this project is. We're trying to eliminate barriers to collaboration, barriers to access to academic programming for students, barriers to streamline processes and automations that exist within the current system. We're not trying to design what unified accreditation is. Unified accreditation informs how we will take advantage of the tools available in the system. But right now, we're focused on removing the technical barriers to promote some of those activities that I just described. So having clarity and maintaining a consistent project dissemination strategy and a robust communication plan are going to be our key tools in our arsenal to get out in front of that one. And just continue to echo that we're not here to try to design what unified accreditation is. We're here to support it and make sure that the campus communities are aware of how that's actually going to work. So that is a quick whirlwind tour of where we are with the repaving Main Street project. I'm happy to address any questions at this point. Otherwise, we can roll right into the next tab. Chair Cates, I defer to you on that one.
Thanks, David. Why don't we see if we have questions at this point? If you could take down the slide so we can see everybody. Questions for David Demers about his presentation? I don't see any. David, thanks very much. I do know you. One thing you talked about just a moment ago about cross-campus programming is a subject which comes up for the board all the time, and anything you can do in your work to increase how easy that is for the students is certainly a priority. I understand there's some technical issues with doing it in the way you'd first proposed, but thinking from a student-centered perspective, anything that makes it easier for campuses to cooperate on programming is a good thing.
Absolutely. And folks probably already aware that we are working very closely with Vice Chancellor St. John on how the unified catalog component plays into that, how all of this information is going to flow. And he's a core member of our steering committee team. So we are working lockstep in how to streamline some of those processes. Absolutely.
Thanks. Seeing no other hands in the air, the next agenda item is also David Demers. Tab 10, we have the State of Information Security 2023 Executive Summary. David, I don't know if you'd like to briefly address what's there. We've had an opportunity to look at it, and then we can see if there are questions. But again, remind us what this is, if you would.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to put this summary in front of the FFT committee. There's no presentation for this. Hopefully everyone had a chance to review those components. I invited our Chief Information Security Officer, John Forker, who is also joining us here today, to basically provide a summary of where we are with our state of information security to the Chancellor's Cabinet, highlighting where we have some current risks, where we have some current issues. I do want to highlight that John has been remarkably effective with very limited resources, a very tiny staff to keep on top of a very complex and ever-changing landscape of information security. And the executive summary, I think, reflects where we see some shifts in terms of vulnerabilities for not only University Main System, but in higher education in general. So we wanted to bring it to this group just for awareness that we are working on this. We do have plans in place. We are trying our best to keep up with this landscape, and we wanted to make sure if there were any questions, particularly about the executive summary, that John can respond to them. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thanks, David, and welcome, John. Questions for either of them? Trustee McMahon, David.
Thank you. I noticed that we now can't get cyber liability insurance coverage because the market has changed. My question is just to make sure I fully understand. So we're completely bare of insurance coverage. We don't have any stop loss of any sort, and we don't have the ability of a high deductible policy. So should we have a cyber breach, we're totally on our own to fund whatever happens as a result of it. Is my understanding correct?
We would be considered self-insured at this point. Very similar to the state, and many state agencies are also in a similar boat. So we have a small pool of money available to mitigate and provide things like forensics and potential credit monitoring for affected populations. But we are also working to try to figure out how to retain and restore access to cyber liability insurance coverage. One of the main components to that is the rollout of multi-factor authentications for critical systems. So we are rolling that out as we speak. I'd invite Gretchen to weigh in on what our strategy is to revisit that issue as soon as possible.
Thank you, David. We are committed to reevaluating that and working with our insurance brokers on our options. But again, cyber risks have largely become an uninsurable threat across many state institutions. And so multi-factor authentication will be a key component of us being able to get coverage in the future. So we appreciate David and John Forker's time and focus on getting multi-factor authentication across our system operationalized.
Thank you. Chair Riley.
That definitely got my attention. That's a worrisome reality. Could you, and I know we had a little breach at UMA. Could you explain how we fund that self-insured pool? What's the financing look like and where's it from? And what our likely liability would be?
Gretchen, do you want to take that one?
I can take the funding piece, but David and John, I'll let you speak to the incident at UMA and clarify that. In terms of the funding piece, we have set up a separate reserve fund because of the threat that would be involved in disclosing how much that is funded. I won't disclose that, but it is funded and we do have it allocated. We also have a plan in place and have worked closely with the state of Maine as well to develop a plan so we can respond promptly in the event that there is something negative happens. So please forgive me for being a bit vague, but I want to protect
you're
our
100% right. Good point.
Chair Riley, did you have a question about the UMA incident that you'd like clarification on? I'm happy to cover any of that.
Just real quickly, is that, what happened, is that unrelated to when we think about security breaches?
It's not. It's actually covered as one of the risks in there. It falls into the human error category. So that was a simple coding error that resulted in students having elevated access to the Brightspace Learning Management System, and the Brightspace Learning Management System only. Want to point that out. No underlying student information system access was breached on that one. But that was just somebody that was working a little too quickly and made a mistake, and it was not caught through our normal change management processes. That has been addressed. We did an after-action review. We've mitigated it and have done what we can to make sure that we have protected access to the learning management system as we go forward. And luckily, it was limited in scope. It was a small population that was affected, and it also occurred over Thanksgiving break where, people weren't busy logging into Brightspace, luckily, at that point.
Thank you.
And David, there were no outside parties that accessed Brightspace during that time. Is that fair to say?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Emily Kane.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear about the increased use of two-factor. And my other question is, have we considered offering any sort of access to, I know LastPass is right now on sort of the down, but 1Password or the password management systems that allow people to securely, and that's what I use. I don't remember any passwords but one anymore because I don't want to. I don't want them all to be the same. And so I'm wondering if we have thought about offering that, or if maybe if we do, to either students or faculty and staff, because I think those kinds of programs can be very helpful in mitigating risk.
John Forker, would you like to take that one on?
Sure. So internally, we use LastPass. I know they had an incident, but we've been very close to read the reports on what.
That's what I use. I'm just gonna. That's what I use.
And it doesn't put it. put us so much at risk as what has happened there, because they didn't have access to the password databases underneath. Although it puts us at pause and makes us look at others to see, you know, what other options are out there. We use it internally within IT because our systems administration folks have you know, extremely sensitive passwords, and you know, we want to make sure that those are protected to a higher level anyway. And of course, there's so many of them, and if something were to happen to somebody, we want to be able to have access to, you know, root passwords and things like that. It's, you know, we've looked at, you know, what it'd be to roll it out, but the annual license fees are you know, reasonably high, and you know, we haven't made a determination whether that's got its value for payback. Certainly, what we advocate so many times is not to reuse passwords, and you know, that's one of the worst, you know, causes of breaches is and expansions of breaches. So you know, we'd be in favor of that sort of thing, but again, it ends up to just be a cost issue to whether it's reasonably affordable to offer that kind of service compared to the other sorts of things that we do for security.
Thank you.
Thanks, David McMahon.
Does the community college have the same problem with cyber insurance? Have we talked to them? Is there any way that we could work together?
We have talked to them. Oh, go ahead, David.
I think we were going to say the same thing. We're in the very same boat. I think Gretchen's had more in-depth conversations directly with them, but I know that they are also subject to limited access to coverage at this point.
That is accurate.
Thank you. Any other questions for David or Gretchen or John?
I would just say, I think we kind of had a bunch of questions on this, but it's clearly a bigger issue. We're not unique. And it sounds like we're in very good hands. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing nothing further, we'll end this discussion and go to our last agenda item, which is the usual capital project status report from Carolyn McDonough and bond projects update.
Yes, good morning. Thank you everyone for sticking around. I just highlight a couple of points on this report here. The capital projects piece of the report has 32 projects totaling over $330 million. And as you've seen today, that will be growing exponentially, well, not exponentially, but quite a bit. The next report, one actually grouping of projects that I just would highlight is the USM development projects. So the Portland Commons, the McGoldrick Center, and the parking garage projects. Those are all nearing the completion of and occupancy for this summer. So they're all tied together where parking is required for those projects to be used. But we are working closely with the contractor and the developer in getting those projects completed, with punch list already having begun in some of the spaces within the dormitory, the residence hall. And we expect to be ready for occupancy this summer as planned. And on the the bond project, the 2018 bond project report, we are moving, ever closer to completing that $40 million investment. And I just wanted to mention that early on, some progress was delayed due to the pandemic, but we are getting closer to finishing that up. And as stated in the report, we're leveraging between the $49 million and additional funds. We're up to $68 million right now with matching. So that's very exciting. And that's all I have for highlights. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Carolyn, just generally, how much have borrowing rates gone up for us in the last year? Do you have
Sorry, did you say borrowing rates?
Yeah, as we go out in the bond market coming up, how much more are we going to be spending, you think?
I'm afraid that's not something I generally handle. Gretchen,
Okay.
noticed you on
I didn't mean to
mute,
put you on
so
the spot. I'm
that's
just
all
wondering.
right. No, I was looking for Tracy. I don't see her.
Yeah, that's something that we would typically work with Tracy Elliott and her team on.
Okay.
But we can follow up on that question.
Yeah, I just assume it's not getting cheaper. I just wanted to get some sense.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Questions about this report? I am not seeing any. So thank you very much, Carolyn, as always. And I believe we have finished our agenda, but we have 13 minutes and it's a terrible thing to waste. Anything else for the general good of the order before we finish up? Seeing none, I think we
Great
can.
meeting, Roger.
Excuse me, Patrick Flood.
Yeah, just a question. Well, David is still here. I know we had a yellow flag us for staffing shortages, problems with not having enough staff to do some of the projects on the repaving job. Is that people that are employees that we're short on, or are these contractors and consultants that we're not having?
Thank you. Yeah, these are internal functional staff on our side that we're having and on the technical side as well, but we've sort of shuffled people around on my team to fill in gaps where possible. But again, we are relying on our functional office personnel and partners to be able to commit cycles to this project. And as I said previously, they all have day jobs, and as they lose people, they're scrambling to plug as many holes as possible, and it just has a domino effect, unfortunately. So we're doing what we can to work with them, trying to figure out backfill options and some staff augmentation approaches, but it has gotten in the way of our being able to maintain on track as originally planned.
Thank you.
Any other questions on any subject? Seeing none, thank you all. It's been a long morning. We've got through a tremendous amount of material though. So thank you all for your attention, and all the presenters for being so thoughtfully organized and succinct. And we do